Chapter 587. Slowly withdrawing his blood-stained fist, Wu Qi glanced coldly at the officials of High Province who were kneeling on the square. He asked indifferently, "Useless chickens and stray dogs that can't even withstand a single blow, yet they dare to rebel. Lords of High Province, are there any imitators?" The officials of High Province threw themselves to the ground and pressed their foreheads against it. "We dare not," they cried out in unison. "Everyone has the right to kill such a traitor." Yu Miao had easily achieved his goal of deterring the local officials of High Province by killing them to establish his authority. As the prefecture overseer of High Province, he had the power to decide the life and death of the officials of the counties under his command. Coupled with the tragic scene of thousands of heads rolling on the ground, even if the officials of High Province had other thoughts, they could only bury them firmly in their hearts, then slowly crush them and let them drift away with the wind. Mu Hai's body, as well as the corpses of his clan members, told the officials of High Province that the Yu clan of Zhong Province had come. High Province had changed, and its master had changed. The good days of the local officials of High Province were numbered. Standing on the square, stepping on a thick layer of blood, Yu Miao looked up at the sky and announced the appointment of his retinue. The military minister of High Province's military court, Wu Qi. The criminal minister of Navy's punishment court, Yu Mi. The grand oracle of High Province's directorate of celestials, Yu Gu. The minister of agriculture of High Province's agriculture court, Yu Miao. The other officials in charge of civil affairs and the people's livelihood, such as the Minister of Civil Affairs and Minister of Pastors, were also the members of the Yu clan brought here by Yu Miao. High Province was a vast place with a population of less than 10 million, and it was divided into 5 counties outside Ningbo City. The county governors of these 5 counties had been stripped of their power and positions by Yu Miao and made to serve as adjutants in the various palaces. All 5 county governors had been replaced by Yu Miao's retinue. In addition, the adjutants and subordinates of the palaces and the counties in Ningbo City had also been replaced by the people brought here by Yu Miao. The local officials of High Province were completely stripped of their power. Unless they wanted to wrestle with Yu Miao, they had no choice but to accept it. Yu Miao's second order was to allocate 200,000 people from each of the 5 counties in High Province to form a new county and divide the vast land in the southeast of High Province for these 1 million people to reclaim and develop. Yu Miao did not give any explanation for the order, but Wu Qi knew that the land in the southeast was Yu Miao's reward for what he had done, and the millions of people were the capital Yu Miao had given him for his development. How the boundless wilderness in the southeast of Haizhou could develop in the future depended on Wu Qi's ability. Yu Mu did not name the new county, nor did he assign any officials to it. Everything was left to Wu Qi, making it clear that he would not interfere with any of Wu Qi's actions. Wu Qi cupped his fist to Yu Miao without saying a word. He knew that Yu Miao was showing his goodwill. He was a little worried. Yu Miao was an honest man of his word, but Princess Zhonglu was plotting against his foundation in High Province. Wu Qi felt a little sorry for Yu Miao. But soon, this trace of unwillingness was crushed by Wu Qi. In the world of immortal cultivators, if one did not move forward, one would fall back. If one did not devour others, one would wait for others to devour him. Wu Qi had learned the cruel law of the jungle. At worst, he could guarantee Yu Miao a lifetime of glory and wealth, and let him live a carefree life with wine and beauties. As for the rest, Wu Qi could not care less. For the underhand sect, the vast land of High Province was the best place to develop. For Great Yan Dynasty, it was also the foundation for its rise on Pangu continent. As Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu had become de facto husband and wife, he was determined to have High Province under his control for both public and private reasons. Stepping on the blood that covered the ground, Yu Miao had established his initial authority in High Province. Looking down with satisfaction at the nearly 1,000 officials of High Province kneeling on the ground, he waved his hand lightly and said, "Return to your posts according to the orders just now. Throw the bodies of the traitor Mu Hai and his family out of the city and feed them to the wild beasts. No one is allowed to collect their bodies. Let all the people in High Province see that this is the consequence of colluding with immortals and betraying the Yu." Wu Qi and the other retinues who had followed Yu Mu to High Province gave him a deep bow, and the officials of High Province answered one after another. After that, they rose to their feet and began to search for the master they would serve in the future, preparing to hand over the power in their hands. After bidding Yu Miao farewell, Wu Qi went straight to the military court with a few hundred men captains of High Province's military court. High Province was only a 9th-grade province. Although it had a vast territory, it was sparsely populated, and the annual tax it collected was not much. Therefore, Ningbo City was not very large. The military court of High Province was a simple building, consisting of 3 palaces surrounded by green trees. It was nothing compared to the magnificent military court of Zhongning City, which occupied thousands of acres of land. Like the other provinces, the military court of High Province was located to the west of Ningbo City. The west was the direction of the White Tiger, which was used for war and killing. Therefore, the palaces were located there. The 3 palaces were arranged in a straight line from east to west, with their doors facing the west to absorb the murderous aura from the west. The palaces were simple in construction, and there were no patterns or decorations on their surfaces. Unlike the magnificent palaces in Zhong Province, there were only 2 stone pillars in front of the entrance of the military court of High Province. The braziers above them were only the size of basins, and the flame pillars inside them were only about 2 feet tall. The green flames spewing out of them could not even cover the palaces themselves, let alone illuminating the whole city. The flame pillars in front of the palaces of many official institutions in Diu was burning a mixture of expensive merman oil and ambergris. High Province had very little tax revenue, so it was impossible for them to burn large amounts of oil day and night like the other provinces. Starting from the west, the first palace was where the military minister of High Province issued military orders and handled military affairs. The second palace was where the military minister of High Province held meetings with his generals and entertained guests, and the third palace was flanked by 2 side palaces, which were the sleeping quarters of the military minister of High Province. There were dozens of rooms in each of them, enough for hundreds of people to live in, while the side palaces on both sides were used for servants, maids, and personal guards. All in all, although the Directorate of Celestials in High Province was very small, it was fully equipped with all the necessary facilities. Below the 3 palaces, through a secret door in the second palace, there was a small armory, which stored some armaments allocated from the military court, including a large number of bone talismans, armors, arrows, crossbows, swords, and many others. There were even a large number of energy stones specially supplied to the 3 small flying ships under the jurisdiction of the military court of High Province. Sitting in the main hall of the military court, Wu Qi was quickly flipping through some accounts and files sent to him by the military minister, Huang Liang, and the 500 men captains. The main hall was small and dimly lit. It seemed that High Province was so poor that they could not even light a few more lamps in the main hall, which made Wu Qi feel very helpless. The military strength of High Province was not strong, and there were only 500 men captains in Ningbo City, each of whom had a total of 500 soldiers. Moreover, their cultivation bases were very weak, and they were only comparable to 36th-tier heaven immortals. The military minister, Huang Liang, had a slightly higher cultivation base, which was only at the level of 35th-tier heaven immortals. There were 5 counties outside Ningbo City, and each county had a military court, each with 100 men captain and 30 to 50 soldiers. In total, the military court of High Province had a military minister and 1,000 men captains, which made it a total of 708 soldiers. The military strength of a 9th-grade province could not even form a 1,000-man team, and even though he was the military minister, Huang Liang, he did not even manage to become a 1,000-man captain in Diyu's army. Shaking his head discontentedly, Wu Qi knocked on the table in front of him, which was carved out of a boulder, and said with a cold grin, "How can High Province defend its territory and protect its people with a mere army of 700 soldiers? If itinerant cultivators set up bases in High Province, how can we deal with their encroachment?" Huang Liang's face turned red as he bowed his head and murmured in a low voice, "High Province's finances are so poor that we can't afford to pay too many soldiers." The salaries of the soldiers in Du were very high, and if there were any soldiers who died in battle or were disabled, the compensation was also very high. With a population of less than 10 million, High Province could only afford 700 soldiers. These soldiers had to be equipped with a lot of armors, bone talismans, and other armaments, and be responsible for the maintenance of the 3 small flying ships. Moreover, they had to bear the cost of all kinds of medicinal pills and soups needed for the soldiers' cultivation. High Province really could not afford to pay more soldiers. Lightly tapping his finger on the roster, Wu Qi frowned and looked up at the ceiling of the main hall. Yu Miao had brought nearly 1,000 squires with him, and Yu Huai had given him 3,000 private guards. Presumably, these 3,000 private guards were the foundation that Yu Miao had accumulated, and he had pulled them out to keep up appearances for Yu Miao, the sole heir. Now, these 3,000 private guards had been incorporated into the personal guards of the prefecture overseer mansion. As the supreme commander of the province's military force, the military court of High Province only had 700 soldiers, which was something Wu Qi could not tolerate. Starting tomorrow, recruit new soldiers. Within 3 days, I want 10,000 soldiers in High Province. Wu Qi held up a finger and stared at Huang Liang in an irrefutable manner. Just bring me 10,000 soldiers, and I'll find a way to pay for all their expenses. Huang Liang, a tall and burly man with black fur all over his body like a gorilla, was taken aback. He took a step back in horror and cried out, "An army of 10,000 soldiers? In a shabby place like High Province? Are you kidding me, military minister?" Wu Qi gave Huang Liang a fierce glare and cursed, "Your grandson is joking with you. Isn't it just 10,000 soldiers? Why can't we afford it? Hurry up and recruit more soldiers, and I'll take care of the rest." After pondering for a brief moment, Wu Qi nodded slowly and said with a smile, "A new official must act prudently, and killing people to establish my authority is the most effective way. If the prefecture overseer wants to kill someone, how can I, the military minister, not do it? Huang Liang, go to the Directorate of Celestials and ask Grand Oracle Yu Gu to send 100 oracles with the army." Huang Liang looked at Wu Qi in astonishment and stammered, "Why you want to kill people?" Thinking of the thousands of heads rolling on the ground in the square, Huang Liang felt a chill on his neck. He gave the terrified Huang Liang a sideways glance and said with a cold grin, "I'm not going to kill you, I'm going to kill." "Well, do you know an itinerant immortal in High Province called Reverend Yao Yu?" "Reverend Yao Yu?" Huang Liang and the 500 men lieutenants let out a miserable shriek as they took a few steps back at the same time and fell to the ground on their butts. Huang Liang's face was as pale as a sheet, and cold sweat was dripping from his body. Chapter 588. Stand down. Wu Qi glared at the 500 men lieutenants. Then, a fiend shadow flashed behind his back, and Huang Liang and the 500 men lieutenants, who were still in a state of shock, did not see what was happening next to Wu Qi. The 500 men lieutenants exchanged a glance, then staggered out of the hall, completely ignoring the situation around them. As the fiend shadow flashed past, all 500 men lieutenants received a heavy punch on the back of their heads, causing their eyeballs to pop out and making them fall to the ground with a muffled grunt. The shadow flickered again and again, and the puppet picked up the unconscious 100 men lieutenants as if they were bags of straw, then threw them into the woods beside the hall. Wisps of dark smoke rose from the puppet's body as he reached out his hand and pulled out the souls of the 100 men lieutenants from their bodies, then cast a restrictive spell on them. Twitching the corner of his mouth at Huang Liang with a fake smile, Wu Qi pushed his hand forward, and the stone door of the hall closed with a loud boom. Placing both hands on the table and holding his chin with his palms, he asked Huang Liang with a smile, "Come, tell me about that Reverend Yao Yu. If you tell me, you'll live, but if you don't, your whole family will die." Beads of cold sweat kept breaking out of Huang Liang's forehead. He stared at Wu Qi in horror and stammered, "If I tell you, I'll die too, and if I don't tell you, I'll die too. Just kill me." Then he rolled to his knees and kowtowed repeatedly, causing the ground to rumble with his head. The ground paved with boulders was cracked and cracked by him, creating a large pit. Frowning slightly, Wu Qi rose to his feet and came before Huang Liang, grabbing him by the neck and lifting him up. "There are many ways to die," said Wu Qi with a cold grin. "Some die comfortably, and some die miserably. Some die with a clear conscience, and some die with everlasting regret. Your wife and children don't want them to be demoted to untouchables and suffer all kinds of humiliation and torture, do they?" Huang Liang raised his head like a hoodlum. He looked at Wu Qi and said through gritted teeth, "My parents died when I was young, and I have no siblings. I have not married yet, so naturally, I don't have any children or grandchildren. My lord's threats are useless against me." Wu Qi was stunned. He had actually encountered such a superb person? Looking at Huang Liang's hairy black face, Wu Qi frowned and suddenly slapped Huang Liang's face. Huang Liang cried out as he was sent flying tens of zhang away by Wu Qi. Next, Wu Qi chased after Huang Liang and started punching and kicking him. With the overall strength of a Tier 1 Heaven Immortal, Huang Liang did not have the slightest ability to resist. He was like a little baby being trampled by a crazy black bear. All he could do was hold his head in his arms, hide in a corner, and beg for mercy. Wu Qi paid no attention to Huang Liang's miserable howls. His fists fell like raindrops, and every punch landed on the most painful spots on Huang Liang's body. Throat, heart, ribs, liver, armpits, and so on. Even a slight touch on these vital spots would cause one to wish he was dead. Therefore, every punch from Wu Qi landed on Huang Liang's critical spots, causing him so much pain that he wished he was dead, but not enough to injure his bones and internal organs. The Purgatory Devil Sutra had countless methods to torture people, such as how to make people suffer the greatest pain without damaging their vitality. There were countless such vicious secret techniques in the Purgatory Devil Sutra. Huang Liang was just a nobody from a small city in High Province, who had not even reached the rank of a 1,000-man lieutenant. How could he endure Wu Qi's torture? In just the time to finish a pot of tea, Huang Liang screamed at the top of his voice, "Stop beating me! I'll tell you everything." Grabbing Huang Liang's hair and crushing the hairpin, Wu Qi brought Huang Liang's huge body before his face. Grinning coldly, he said, "Tell me everything. If you dare to hide anything from me, I'll definitely pull out your soul and seal it in a brazier on a stone pillar outside the hall. You'll suffer the torture of being burned by a raging fire for tens of thousands of years, and you'll wish you were dead." Huang Liang's face was covered with snot and tears. Upon hearing Wu Qi's threat, he said in a daze, "Your Excellency, pulling out my soul and sealing it in a brazier to suffer the torture of being burned by a raging fire for tens of thousands of years is the ability of oracles. You and I are warriors who work as laborers. How could you possibly have such a divine ability?" Wu Qi suddenly realized that this Huang Liang was a simple-minded man. There was nothing to talk to him, and a direct threat of violence was more effective. He snorted coldly as he recalled the cultivation technique of the oracles of Deyu's Directorate of Celestials found in the jade slip given to him by Yumu. Suddenly, a wisp of gray smoke sprayed out of his fingertip. The gray smoke burst into flames and sprayed out a large sheet of green ghost flame, which curled up to Huang Liang's thick beard. In the blink of an eye, Huang Liang's face was ablaze, and half of his beard and eyebrows were burned off. Huang Liang screamed at the top of his voice, "You're actually a cultivator of both fleshly body and magic? I'm convinced. I'm convinced." Casually throwing Huang Liang to the ground, Wu Qi's body was shrouded in a layer of green flame. His body slowly floated up, hovering about a foot above the ground as he looked down at Huang Liang and said with a cold grin, "Tell me, what's the matter with that Reverend Yao Yu? If you dare to hide anything, I'll pull out your soul and interrogate you in detail." Huang Liang's body trembled. Not daring to hide anything, he told Wu Qi everything he knew about Reverend Yao Yu. First of all, Huang Liang was not the real Grand Oracle of High Province's military court. To be exact, he was the former military minister's adjutant. In fact, it could be seen from Huang Liang's cultivation base. Even Mu Hai, the finance minister of the agricultural court, had such a cultivation base, so Huang Liang's strength was not worthy of the position of the highest military commander in High Province. However, The former military minister was murdered 20 years ago, and the murderer was Reverend Yao Yu of Mount Moon Gazing. 20 years ago, through the Panga's map, the prefecture overseer of Hai Province discovered an unusual fluctuation of natural energy in a certain mountain range, and he immediately sent an army to investigate. As a result, the hundreds of soldiers he sent bumped into Reverend Yao Yu, who was extracting the fire from the earth's core to craft various magical treasures for his disciples. How could these defeated soldiers of Hai Province deal with Reverend Yao Yu? In front of hundreds of soldiers, Reverend Yao Yu tortured the former military minister to death with the cruelest method for 3 days and 3 nights. After that, he brought a dozen itinerant immortals and laid siege to Ningbo City, deterring the prefecture overseer and all the officials. The overall strength of Hai Province was too weak to deal with a powerful immortal like Reverend Yao Yu. And because of De Yu's unique system of government, the prefecture overseer was even more reluctant to ask the upper provinces to send troops to help, and he did not want to let the powers of other provinces enter Hai Province. Therefore, the prefecture overseer simply pretended that he did not know that Reverend Yao Yu had established a sect in Hai Province, and no matter what Reverend Yao Yu did, he just pretended that he did not see it. Huang Liang had witnessed how Reverend Yao Yu killed his immediate superior, and he knew that all the officials of Hai Province were very afraid of him. So, when Wu Qi said that he would start the fire from Reverend Yao Yu's head, he did not have the courage to do so. Cowardly as a mouse, unworthy of an important position. Wu Qi frowned. These De Yu officials of Hai Province were completely different from the De Yu officials he knew. In other provinces, itinerant cultivators were suppressed by the official forces of De Yu, and they could only act cautiously and keep a low profile. But in Hai Province, it was the officials of De Yu who were frightened by an itinerant cultivator. Looking at Huang Liang, Wu Qi shook his head and said, "You better go and recruit soldiers. Aside from the 700 soldiers you have now, recruit another 10,000 new soldiers for me. I will personally command these 10,000 new soldiers, and you will lead the 700 soldiers to maintain the daily security of Hai Province, drive away the wild beasts for the people, and treat the natural disasters." Upon hearing Wu Qi's words, Huang Liang burst into laughter and said, "Don't you need me to lead the soldiers to fight Reverend Yao Yu?" Wu Qi rolled his eyes and ignored Huang Liang. In the dense forest outside the Great Hall, the celestial fiend puppet, who had just cast restrictive spells on the souls of the 5 comatose lieutenants, shook his head and removed all the restrictive spells on their souls. It was useless to control these people who were scared out of their wits and had lost their courage. He would just let them roam the streets and maintain the daily security. As for the rest, Wu Qi would do it himself. Patting Huang Liang on the head, Wu Qi sighed and said, "You are such a big man, but why are you so timid? You better behave yourself in the future. The Directorate of Celestials does not keep good-for-nothings." Shaking his head, Wu Qi did not bother to ask the Directorate of Celestials to send oracles to assist him in the battle. After pondering for a moment, he walked straight out of the Great Hall and headed for the Prefecture Overseer Mansion. While he was still some distance away from the Great Hall, Wu Qi heard Yu Mu's cursing. He was cursing the officials of Hai Province with the most vicious words, even cursing 18 generations of their ancestors. In a conservative and traditional dynasty like De Yu, cursing the ancestors of others was almost enough to provoke a duel between 2 clans. It showed how angry Yu Mu was. When Wu Qi walked into the Great Hall, he saw Yu He scolding the officials of Hai Province, gesticulating and waving his hands. The granary was empty. The money vault was empty. The storehouse of energy stones and immortal stones was empty. Even the seeds that were going to be distributed to the people for planting next year were gone. Perhaps it was the doing of the former prefecture overseer who had disappeared, or perhaps it was the doing of the officials of Hai Province when Yu Mu did not hurt anyone. In short, Hai Province was now an empty shell, with not a single copper coin in its storehouse. Even the annual tribute, which was supposed to be a small tribute every 3 years and a large tribute every 10 years, was gone. It was a huge deficit, and Yu Mu had to find a way to fill it himself. How could Yu Mu not be angry? The former officials of Hai Province cupped their fists and stood in the Great Hall, but no one said a word, and no one came up with a plan to deal with the situation. They had figured it out. Since Yu Mu had become the prefecture overseer, and had brought so many people with him to take away their positions and power, it was he who should clean up the mess. Yu Mu's eyes turned cold when he saw the subtle expressions on the faces of the local officials of Hai Province. Just as he was about to execute all these officials and turn all their belongings into public funds, Wu Qi strode into the room. A smile bloomed on Yu Mu's face when he saw Wu Qi. He rose to his feet and came up to greet him. "Military Minister, have you taken care of everything in the military court?" Wu Qi shook his head and snorted contemptuously. "A bunch of useless trash, a bunch of women who have been scared out of their wits. Please lend me 1,000 armored soldiers to kill a few itinerant immortals and seize all their belongings. Then, the prefecture overseer mansion and the military court will share the loot 50-50. Isn't that great?" Grinning coldly, Wu Qi glanced at the officials of Hai Province in the Great Hall, shook his head, and said mockingly, "The itinerant immortals of Hai Province are very rich." Yu Mu's eyes lit up, and then he suddenly understood the meaning behind Wu Qi's words. He flew into a rage and cursed the officials of Hai Province. After cursing for a full quarter of an hour, he ordered the 1,000 private guards who accompanied him to be at Wu Qi's disposal. Wu Qi cupped his fist and bowed, then walked out with his head held high and left with 1,000 soldiers and 300 oracles. Chapter 589. 3 flying ships, pale red in color and shaped like wolves and decorated with wings on both sides, sped across the sky. Each ship was 300 feet long and could accommodate up to 500 armored soldiers. They were the only large-scale weapons owned by the military court of Hai Province. Standing on the prow of the first ship, Wu Qi carried Huang Liang, who had gone limp all over his body, and looked down excitedly at the beautiful mountains and rivers below. Hai Province was bordered by the ocean, and Ningbo City and the other 5 counties were built by the ocean. There were many fishing villages by the seaside. As the ships flew along the coastline, they could see white sails fluttering in the wind, and vaguely hear the singing of fishermen. On the left was the ocean, on the right was a boundless plain, and in the far distance was a vast mountain range. Occasionally, a few small ridges stretched out from the mountains to the ocean, dividing the plain into basins like flying dragons fetching water. Through these ridges, the energy veins between the ocean and the mountains were connected, and these ridges, which stretched for tens of thousands of miles, had become the place in Hai Province with the most abundant natural energy. According to Huang Liang, since the establishment of Hai Province, there had been countless itinerant cultivators cultivating in seclusion, and the strongest among them was Reverend Yao Yu of Mount Moon Gazing. The officials of Hai Province even knew that Reverend Yao Yu was a member of Myriad Immortal Alliance, an organization of itinerant cultivators who were wanted by the government of Diyu. But, due to Reverend Yao Yu's formidable overall strength and his desire to protect himself, the officials of Hai Province had never carried out any large-scale operations against the itinerant cultivators led by him. Since the former military minister was killed by Reverend Yao Yu 20 years ago, no one in Hai Province dared to attack itinerant cultivators. The mighty Hai Province had become a paradise for itinerant cultivators, and countless natural treasures had become tonics for them to improve their cultivation base. Slapping the wolf-head statue on the prow of the ship, Wu Qi snapped, "This great land is the land of the human emperor of Diyu. How can we allow those itinerant cultivators to wreak havoc here? This time, we must flatten Mount Full Moon in one fell swoop and let those itinerant cultivators understand that Hai Province is the territory of humans, not a paradise for immortals like them." Wu Qi told himself that Hai Province was a place that he had his eyes on. Only the cultivators with his permission, such as the underhand sect, could enter this place. As for the other rogue cultivators, they should pack up their belongings and get out of here. If they didn't, they should offer their lives and all their belongings to Wu Qi. The property of these rogue cultivators could be used to train a new army loyal to Wu Qi. The lives of those itinerant cultivators were equivalent to military merits. Wu Qi very much wanted to go to Liangzhu in Yuxiong Plain to see what the capital city of Diyu looked like. That would require a massive amount of military exploits and enough titles to give Wu Qi the chance to go there. The capital city of Diyu was the best place on Panga continent, home to countless rare and precious treasures. When Wu Qi thought of the records of some mystic realms in Yuxiong Plain in the Scroll of Stealing, he could not help but feel his blood boiling. Thinking of this, Wu Qi gave the flying ship's wolf head another forceful slap. As a result, he put a little bit more strength into this palm strike. Following a loud cracking noise, a crack appeared on the wolf's head. Faint black smoke puffed up from every corner of the enormous flying ship. Abruptly, the ship sank straight down from the sky, swooshing straight down. Fortunately, the oracles of the Directorate of Celestials reacted quickly. A few of them threw out a bone talisman, which transformed into a large sheet of cloud and held the ship up. Only then did the ship stop falling. Stunned, Wu Qi snapped at Huang Liang. "What's going on?" "It's just a light slap." With an indescribable embarrassment on his face, Huang Liang bowed to Wu Qi and said, "Your Excellency, since the establishment of Hai Province, there have only been 3 flying ships, and their service life is coming to an end. Also, for so many years, they have never been fully maintained. I'm afraid many of the structures and formations inside them have long decayed. It's not easy for them to fly normally, and it's only natural for them to be damaged by a light slap from Your Excellency." Wu Qi fell silent. After pondering for a long time, he summoned a retainer brought here by Yu Mu, who was now the left minister of the Directorate of Celestials in Hai Province. "If I were to buy a flying ship like the one we used to come to Hai Province, how much would it cost?" The left minister bowed respectfully to Wu Qi and told him a number in a low voice. Wu Qi remained silent for a brief moment, then nodded and said, "Fine, let the brothers squeeze into the other 2 ships. Let's destroy this flying ship right here. I don't think it has any value to maintain it anymore." The number mentioned by the left minister was the total output of Hai Province in 50 years, a 9th-grade province with a population of less than 10 million. It was not the tax revenue of Hai Province, but the total value of all the materials that could be produced after 50 years of hard work by the less than 10 million people in Hai Province was enough to buy a 1-mile-long snake-shaped flying ship. As for the huge flying ships that were hundreds of miles long like the ones from the military court of Zhong Province, with Hai Province's current overall strength, it was better not to dream about it. After moving all the soldiers on the damaged ship to the other 2 ships, Wu Qi smiled at Huang Liang, who was standing next to him, and said, "Don't worry, it's just money. Hai Province may not have enough money to waste like this, but Reverend Yao Yu and the others must be very rich." Rubbing his palms, Wu Qi looked forward and hoped that after so many years of operating in Hai Province, Reverend Yao Yu would have some wealth. Otherwise, he would feel sorry for the trouble he had caused him. Unfortunately, it was not appropriate for Princess Zhang Lu and the others to show themselves in public. Otherwise, he would have asked Princess Zhang Lu to kill Reverend Yao Yu herself to avenge the slap he gave him that day. A few oracles waved their hands and shot out dozens of blazing and violent fireballs, blowing up the damaged flying ship into pieces in the air. Accompanied by muffled explosions, the remaining 2 ships continued to fly forward. Standing at the prow, Wu Qi looked coldly at Huang Liang, who was trembling beside him. Initially, Huang Liang was not needed for this expedition. But Wu Qi and the others did not know the exact location of Mount Moon Gazing. Countless mountains and rivers on Pangu continent did not have names, and Mount Moon Gazing was just a name given by Reverend Yao Yu himself. As for its exact location, even the locals of Hai Province did not know. Apart from Huang Liang, who had at least once patrolled the entire territory of Hai Province, Wu Qi really had no way to find the exact location of Mount Moon Gazing. After flying along the coastline for 7 days and 7 nights, the speed of the 2 ships was beyond Wu Qi's tolerance. When Wu Qi asked Huang Liang for the 100th time why they had not arrived at Mount Moon Gazing, at the edge of the ocean in front of them, a dark green mountain rose from the ground, vaguely towering between the mountains and the ocean. Huang Liang, who was almost driven mad by Wu Qi, immediately pointed at the mountain and cried out joyfully, "That is Mount Moon Gazing. I've been here several times in the past few years, and I can't be wrong." Wu Qi gave Huang Liang a sideways glance. "Been here several times? What are you doing here?" Huang Liang's face turned pale as he bowed his head timidly and murmured in a low voice, I. Clenching his teeth, Huang Liang made up his mind and said, I found a few spirit herbs when I was patrolling, and I've brought them here in exchange for some gold and silver. Giving Huang Liang a deep look, Wu Qi said coolly, remember, spirit herbs are owned by the government of Diyu. Selling them without permission is a capital offense. After a brief pause, Wu Qi patted Huang Liang, whose face was sallow, and said in a low voice, remember, I represent the government of Diyu. Huang Liang's eyes lit up, and his face suddenly flushed. He cupped his fist and said, I understand. Narrowing his eyes slightly, Wu Qi cast his chaotic divine eyes at Mount Moon Gazing, which was about 100 miles away. Surrounded by mountains and peaks, it looked like a cluster of lotus flowers hugging a strangely shaped jade. The mountain stood about 100 miles tall and measured thousands of miles in circumference. Faint purple mist could be seen lingering in the air, and the sun and moon shone brightly in the sky. Clearly, it was an excellent blessed land for immortals. Lights of various colors could be seen flickering in different directions on the surrounding mountains. Reverend Yao Yu had deployed many defensive formations near the mountains, and there were pavilions and houses on the mountains. Obviously, there were cultivators on duty. There is a market at the foot of Mount Moon Gazing, Huang Liang said in a low voice. It is the gathering place of all itinerant cultivators in Hai Province, and it is frequented by many itinerant cultivators. According to the information I've gathered, this market is the only stronghold of Myriad Immortal Alliance in Hai Province. After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi discussed in a low voice with the leading general sent by Yu He and the chief oracle of the Directorate of Celestials, and came up with a general plan. The two flying ships flew to the left and right, flanking the full moon mountain in the distance. Gradually, the clouds above the flying ships spread out, covering the flying ships. The oracles of the Directorate of Celestials had been entangled with immortals for countless years, and they had naturally developed a set of methods that were extremely effective against immortals. This layer of smoke was the spirit confusion smoke unique to the Directorate of Celestials, and it was best at blocking the probing of immortals' divine will. Unless some unlucky guy bumped into the spirit confusion smoke and collided with the flying boats, no one would know that there were actually two flying boats, 1,000 armored soldiers, and hundreds of priests hidden in the spirit confusion smoke. As long as they were led by a few generals, this military force was more than enough to uproot or severely injure an itinerant cultivator power. As he watched the two flying ships fly away, a gust of chilly wind appeared under Wu Qi's feet as he pulled Huang Liang and flew toward the beach at the foot of Mount Moon Gazing. Since Huang Liang had come here to sell the spirit herbs, it proved that he had acquaintances here. It was not easy for them to come to Mount Moon Gazing, and if they were to start a fight without saying a word, wouldn't it be a great spoil to the fun? First, he should find out what kind of treasures there were in the market, and how much profit he could make. Then he could decide on his target before killing them. Wouldn't that be better than rushing in rashly? With all kinds of bad thoughts in his mind, Wu Qi brought Huang Liang, whose face had turned a little pale again, and flew to the edge of Mount Moon Gazing. High up in the sky, a full moon hung high in the sky. On the sea, a line of snow-white waves was constantly surging towards the beach. On the beach, which had a magnificent greenish-purple hue under the moonlight, a market about 10 miles in circumference was brightly lit. Many immortals and itinerant cultivators were having fun in the market, ignoring the change of day and night. Together with Huang Liang, Wu Qi landed at the edge of the market and strode into it. There was not a single guard in the huge market, and no one noticed the arrival of Wu Qi and Huang Liang. After walking for a quarter of an hour with Huang Liang, Wu Qi suddenly heard an excited shout coming from a shop on the side of the road. "Ha! Grand Oracle, what good stuff have you brought this time? Are you looking for an aphrodisiac drug, or a puppet talisman that can control people?" Accompanied by the loud laughter, a fat middle-aged man, whose cultivation base was not higher than Jin Dan realm, strode out from the shop. Chapter 590. Wu Qi looked at Huang Liang with a faint smile. An aphrodisiac? A puppet talisman that could control one's soul? The former military minister had indeed traded some good stuff. Huang Liang, on the other hand, coughed a few times at a loss, then clasped his fist at the fat man and stammered, "You must be joking, manager you." "Huh, this time. Huang Liang could not find a suitable excuse for the moment, so he turned to look at Wu Qi awkwardly. Wu Qi touched the storage ring on his left hand with his right hand, and a big white ginseng as thick as an arm with a spirit talisman stuck on its surface appeared in his palm. The ginseng exuded a strong energy, and the green stem on its head looked very fresh. A cluster of fiery red ginseng seeds swayed in the wind on top of the green stem, giving off an intoxicating fragrance. The ginseng had hands and feet, and its head had almost taken the shape of a human. It was a spirit ginseng that could cultivate into a ginseng immortal in just a few hundred years. However, the spirit talisman stuck on its body clearly stated in seal script, "Yu Miao, the Grand Oracle of the Yu's Directorate of Celestials in Zhong Province, was suppressed in a certain spirit mountain in Zhong Province on a certain day in a certain month in a certain year." Just like the great banyan tree Wu Qi had seen in Greenwood Mountain, this unlucky spirit ginseng was also suppressed by the Directorate of Celestials, its consciousness shattered, and turned into a spirit herb with a powerful medicinal strength that could almost bring the dead back to life. However, it had lost the chance to cultivate into a demon and eventually become an immortal. The Directorate of Celestials of Du had spared no effort in suppressing all kinds of demons, and any demon that fell into their hands would have their consciousness shattered and be completely suppressed. After the spirit ginseng was suppressed, Yu Miao brought it back and stored in the storehouse, planning to give it to his descendants to improve their cultivation base or concoct all kinds of life-prolonging spirit pills. When Wu Qi accompanied Yu Miao to High Province to take office, he had extorted a fortune from him before he left. There were 18 similar spirit ginsengs in his odd-shaped storage ring, and if he consumed all of them at once, it would be enough to produce a few heaven immortals. As soon as the spirit ginseng appeared, the fat shopkeeper Yu narrowed his eyes with a smile. He looked at the spirit ginseng without blinking and said, "Lord Huang Liang, have you brought a distinguished guest? Is this general your colleague? Io, such a high-quality spiritual ginseng is really rare. Come. Our Yao Yu Pavilion's price is the fairest. Other than our Yao Yu Pavilion, who else would buy this spiritual ginseng?" Reaching out to grab Wu Qi's sleeve, shopkeeper Yu pulled Wu Qi back to the shop he came out of. Wu Qi stood firmly on the ground, and no matter how hard shopkeeper Yu pulled him, he did not budge. Huang Liang stood awkwardly off to the side, rubbing his hands in embarrassment. He glanced at shopkeeper Yu, then at Wu Qi. It was as if he had 1,000 words to say, but they were all stuck in his throat, and he could not utter a single word. Wu Qi smiled and did not say a word, but shopkeeper Yu's smiling face suddenly changed. Unable to pull Wu Qi, he turned to Wu Qi and said with a sneer, "What do you mean by this, my lord? Since you've taken out such a good treasure, why don't you go to the Yao Yu Pavilion and discuss the price with me? What are you doing here?" With a smile, Wu Qi waved his hand and threw away shopkeeper Yu's hand that was grabbing his sleeve. "I'm not the one who is dawdling," he said with a sneer. "Shopkeeper Yu, just because I've taken out this spirit ginseng doesn't mean I have to sell it to you. This market is so big, who am I going to sell it to?" After listening to Wu Qi's words, shopkeeper Yu suddenly burst into laughter. Along with his laughter, some of the itinerant cultivators who had been watching the fun on the street walked away. Even the shopkeepers of several nearby shops shook their heads and smiled. They cast a few greedy glances at the extraordinary spirit ginseng in Wu Qi's hand and reluctantly looked away. Shopkeeper Yu looked at Wu Qi and sneered. "Listen up. If there are fellow Taoists who come to Yao Yu Immortal Market, let them trade fairly, and our Yao Yu Pavilion will never intervene. But who are you? Do you think you deserve to enjoy the fair treatment of fellow Taoists? Let me tell you clearly, the people brought by Huang Liang, and everything they have in their hands must be traded in Yao Yu Pavilion." Wu Qi was stunned. Shopkeeper Yu's words were so domineering, yet Huang Liang stood there like a little sick chicken, not daring to say a word. Shopkeeper Yu was just a cultivator from the Jindan realm, while Huang Liang was a mighty 35th-tier heaven immortal. Just a spit from him was enough to kill thousands of Jindan realm cultivators, Yet shopkeeper, you dared to act so presumptuously in front of him? How dare a mere Jindan realm cultivator act so presumptuously in front of Huang Liang, a general of the human race who could fight against a heaven immortal? Wu Qi gave Huang Liang a sidelong glance, his eyes filled with disdain. Huang Liang was really shameless for doing business to this extent. Huang Liang bowed his head in shame and said, "Shopkeeper Yu, can we put this deal aside for the time being?" Shopkeeper Yu sneered. He looked at Wu Qi, then at Huang Liang, then held his head up proudly and said, "Put it aside for the time being? What are we going to do then? Are you going to drink some wine, listen to some music, and play with a few women before you talk about the ownership of this spirit ginseng with me?" He gave a few strange laughs, then narrowed his eyes and said, "What a convenient news. A few days ago, Song Liqiong's entire clan was wiped out, and a dozen of his granddaughters were sold to Yaoyu Immortal Market. Now, they are receiving customers in the Fragrance Pavilion. Hee, there are also two beautiful girls in the nascent divinity realm. Could it be that you are also here for this matter?" Huang Liang's eyes lit up when he heard that. He looked up and said hastily, "Is that true?" "Aye, that's great." Wu Qi gave Huang Liang a glare. Apart from being surprised that Yaoyu Immortal Market was doing this kind of human flesh business, Wu Qi was even more enthusiastic about slaughtering the people of Mount Moon Gazing. How much money could Yaoyu Immortal Market make if they were doing this kind of human flesh business? What was the share of Reverend Yaoyu? If he was killed, wouldn't Wu Qi be able to pay for developing his army and his territory in Hai Province? Besides, since the shop was named after Reverend Yaoyu's Taoist name, it must be his business. At the thought of that, an idea came to Wu Qi's mind. He casually threw the spirit ginseng to shopkeeper Yu and said with a smile, "It's a good idea. Let's talk about business first, then we'll talk about romance later. It's such a bright moonlit night, and such a beautiful ocean view. How can we be worthy of our hard work if we don't enjoy ourselves?" Shopkeeper Yu caught the spirit ginseng in a flurry. He did not have time to look at the name of the person marked on the talisman, but hurriedly put his nose to the spirit ginseng and took a deep breath. The fragrance went straight into his internal organs, and he straightened his back. Shaking his head, he praised, "Wonderful! This is indeed a superb natural spirit item." Rolling his eyes, he smiled at Wu Qi and said, "I'll charge you 100 lower-grade energy stones for this wild ginseng. What do you think?" Wu Qi did not say a word, but strode toward Yaoyu Pavilion. When the shopkeepers on the street saw Wu Qi walk into Yaoyu Pavilion, they could not help but shake their heads. It looked like this lucrative business was going to be monopolized by Yaoyu Pavilion once again. But what could they do? Reverend Yaoyu had monopolized Huang Liang's business, so who dared to reason with him? Wu Qi did not comment on shopkeeper Yu's offer. In manager Yu's mouth, a spirit ginseng that had lived for tens of thousands of years was turned into a superb wild ginseng. Presumably, this was also the reason why Huang Liang was forced to lower the price. He gave Huang Liang a fierce glare again. This good-for-nothing has brought shame to the military court of Hai Province for no reason. Of course, Wu Qi did not have any feelings for the military court of Hai Province, but as the military minister now, he had to pay attention to these issues. When they entered Yaoyu Pavilion, manager Yu did not invite Wu Qi and Huang Liang to sit down and serve them tea. He did not even want to waste the most basic courtesy on Huang Liang and his companions. Shopkeeper Yu summoned an old shopkeeper and handed the ginseng to him, asking him to choose the best cold jade box to store it in. When the shopkeeper left with the spirit ginseng, manager Yu sat down on a large chair in the middle of the lobby and said to Wu Qi proudly, "All right, we can talk about the business now. The price of a wild ginseng is 100 lower-grade energy stones, which is a very suitable price. You can take whatever you like in Yaoyu Pavilion, as long as the price is less than 100 lower-grade energy stones." Wu Qi smiled. Without waiting for manager Yu to invite him, he found himself a large chair and sat down. Then, he lifted the front hem of his long robe, crossed his legs and swung them to the side. 100 lower-grade energy stones it is, he said smilingly. "I still have many excellent spirit herbs here, hee hee." With a malicious smile on his face, Wu Qi took out all the spirit herbs from the storage ring given to him by Yu Mu and placed them all on the tea table next to him. Huang Liang was struck dumb, while Manager Yu's eyes gleamed with a green light. He sprung up like a ball and threw himself at the tea table. Wu Qi grabbed Manager Yu's neck and lifted him up into the air. "There's no hurry," he said with a smile. "These things are all yours, Manager Yu. But I just want to ask, does Yao Yu Immortal Market have beast souls of excellent quality? The older the bloodline, the better, and the beast soul must be at least an immortal grade beast soul. It would be best if it can absorb the essence of the moon, purify the essence of the stars, and use it to attack the enemy." Wu Qi's requirements were very high. He had not found a suitable weapon yet, and he could not wait to forge an immortal item for himself. He had a piece of star jade spirit gold, which he had been preparing for a long time. All he needed now was a beast soul strong enough to refine it into an item spirit, so that he could forge an immortal item of his own. Star jade spirit gold was an extremely rare material. Therefore, Wu Qi did not want to waste it by using an ordinary beast soul. Manager Yu's attention was completely attracted by the spirit herbs on the tea table. A strong medicinal aroma lingered at the tip of his nose, and he even ignored the fact that Wu Qi was rudely holding him in his hand. Staring blankly at the pile of spirit herbs worth tens of thousands of spirit stones, he said subconsciously, "A beast soul that absorbs the essence of the stars and moon and uses the power of the stars to attack the enemy? There is no such beast soul in the entire Yao Yu Immortal Market. But my master is now inviting fellow immortals to kill a green dome shark and use its inner core to craft an immortal item. He will set off in 3 days." Wu Qi raised his brows and suddenly laughed. Green dome shark? This was really good news. Chapter 591. Amidst Huang Liang's horrified gaze, wisps of black smoke sprayed out of Wu Qi's 7 apertures, slithering into Manager Yu's body like poisonous snakes. The greedy look in Manager Yu's eyes turned into a warm smile as he cupped his fist and bowed to Wu Qi and said, "Master." Huang Liang opened his mouth and let out a strange cry. But, with a wave of his hand, Wu Qi threw out a gust of wind and choked the cry back into his throat. With a faint smile on his face, Wu Qi gave Huang Liang a look and said in a deep voice, "What are you panicking for? Even if you haven't seen the 7-orifice soul-locking curse, you should know about it." The 7-orifice soul-locking curse was a common technique used by the oracles of Deyu's Directorate of Celestials to control cultivators with low cultivation base. With the help of the power of ghosts, it would turn into poisonous smoke and invade the target's 7 apertures, confuse the target's mind and control his soul. Every year, many low-grade itinerant cultivators were controlled by the oracles with this technique and sent to various itinerant cultivator powers, causing great losses to the itinerant cultivators. Of course, Huang Liang knew what the 7-orifice soul-locking curse was, but he never dreamed that Wu Qi could also use it. He knew that Wu Qi was a cultivator of both magic and fleshly body, but no matter how he looked at it, Wu Qi looked more like a powerful warrior. He could not believe that he could even use a high-level curse related to the soul, such as the 7-orifice soul-locking curse. How strong was he exactly? Ignoring Huang Liang's nagging, Wu Qi threw Manager Yu to the ground and threw all the spirit herbs on the tea table to him. After that, he clapped his hands and said with a smile, "All right, today is safe and sound. You bought a lot of spirit herbs from me with spirit talismans and knockout drops worth 100 mid-grade energy stones. Do you understand?" Shopkeeper Yu nodded and bowed. I understand. Patting Shopkeeper Yu's shoulder with satisfaction, Wu Qi then said in a low voice, 3 days later, bring all the goods and valuables of the Yao Yu Pavilion out of the market and walk 300 miles westward to the mountainous area. Wait for me there, got it? Hide yourself well and don't get killed." He fished out a defensive bone talisman personally crafted by Yu Miao, pointed at it, and shoved the palm-sized talisman into Manager Yu's forehead. He smiled and said, "This treasure can save your life, but don't act recklessly just because you have a treasure to protect you." Shopkeeper Yu hurriedly promised, "Please rest assured, master. There will be no mistakes." Wu Qi smiled pleasantly. From the shelves, he casually took some potions such as Smile of the Virgin and Chaste Woman, and a few powerful immortal talismans. After that, he patted Manager Yu's shoulder, gave Huang Liang a wink, and strode out of the shop. Walking out of the door of the Yao Yu pavilion, Wu Qi burst into laughter and said, "Your Excellency Huang, this is indeed a good place. Ha, where is the drunken fragrance pavilion that Manager Yu mentioned just now? Let's go there and enjoy ourselves. Kiske, we can't miss a female cultivator of nascent divinity realm, can we?" When Huang Liang heard Wu Qi say that he was going to look for those female cultivators who had been trafficked for fun, his eyes shone with a pink gleam. Laughing heartily, he said, "That's a wonderful idea. I'm very familiar with that place. I have to say, those girls who have cultivated are really tender, and I can even rub them with my hand. They are so much prettier than those common women." With their arms around each other's shoulders, they walked toward the drunken fragrance pavilion. Along the way, all the cultivators cast sidelong glances at them, and some of the shopkeepers who were familiar with Huang Liang sighed inwardly, "Manager Yu has earned a fortune again. I can't believe that De Yu's military court can have someone as excellent as Huang Liang." Smiling, Wu Qi entered the drunken fragrance pavilion. He had left the bazaar, and it was a celestial fiend puppet who stayed in the bazaar to fool around with Huang Liang. Quickly, he found a flying ship hidden amidst the clouds in the distance, and gave an order to the generals and oracles on it. 3 days later, Wu Qi followed Reverend Yao Yu and the other immortals to kill the Green Dome Shark, while the armored soldiers and oracles on the 2 ships took the opportunity to break into Mount Moon Gazing and capture Reverend Yao Yu's entire clan, as well as all the immortals and itinerant cultivators in the bazaar. Wu Qi told them frankly that he wanted to use these people as a blood sacrifice, and he did not mind giving some benefits to the generals and oracles on the ships. The generals and oracles were overjoyed when they heard that. They bowed their heads and were willing to follow Wu Qi's orders. Time flew, and 3 days went by in the blink of an eye. Early in the morning, when the sun had just peeked over half of its face from the horizon, Wu Qi saw over 30 beams of light shoot into the sky from Mount Moon Gazing, flying rapidly towards the depths of the ocean. He called out to Huang Liang and the others, then turned into a series of afterimages and sped away, following closely behind the more than 30 beams of light. 6 hours after Wu Qi and those beams of light had left, 2 flying ships began to circle around Mount Moon Gazing. Led by groups of oracles, one after another, they alighted from the ships and landed on the ground, surrounding Mount Moon Gazing from all directions. Each group of armored soldiers was led by 200 or 300 men lieutenants, whose cultivation bases were as strong as heaven immortals. Such a force was more than enough to deal with all the itinerant cultivators on Mount Moon Gazing. But these armored soldiers did not launch an attack. According to Wu Qi's order, they had to wait until Reverend Yao Yu and the others were engaged in a bitter battle with the Green Dome Shark, and only when they received the signal from Wu Qi. Before that, they could not act rashly, because Reverend Yao Yu and the other immortals might return at any time. Only when these immortals were powerless could they break through Mount Moon Gazing in one fell swoop. Wrapping himself in the Shen energy unleashed from the spirit Shen Pearl, Wu Qi transformed into a drifting cloud and followed closely behind Reverend Yao Yu under the cover of the white clouds. When he rescued Princess Zhang Le more than a month ago, Wu Qi had memorized Reverend Yao Yu's appearance. Now, he fixed his eyes on Reverend Yao Yu and paid no attention to the immortals around him whose cultivation bases were around the 30th tier. There was a total of 36 heaven immortals around the 30th tier, and it seemed that all of them were following Reverend Yao Yu's lead. Clearly, they were hired by Reverend Yao Yu to form a formation to deal with the Green Dome Shark, and none of them was as strong as him. After pondering for a while, Wu Qi felt that it was reasonable. Every part of the Green Dome Shark was a treasure, and if he found a helper with a similar cultivation base as him, he would at least get a large share of the profits. However, Reverend Yao Yu only needed to give these heaven immortals a negligible compensation, and he could easily send them away by hiring 36 thugs whose cultivation base was far weaker than him to help him in killing the prey. While wondering what kind of formation Reverend Yao Yu would use to deal with the Green Dome Shark, Wu Qi followed Reverend Yao Yu and kept teleporting for 12 hours. By the time the moon quietly emerged from the east, they had arrived in the depths of the ocean, above an archipelago that stretched for tens of thousands of miles. Mist was rising from the surface of the ocean, and thousands of oddly shaped islands dotted the surface, glinting with a faint silver light under the moonlight. Curiously, Wu Qi exercised his chaotic divine eyes and glanced at these islands, the largest of which was only a few miles in circumference. Originally, they were made of ordinary rocks, but after years of being soaked by the essence of the stars and the moon, the rocks had become as lustrous as jade and were a few times harder than steel. They had mutated into an extremely rare stone. The moon was now high in the sky, and the stars were twinkling in the sky. The thousands of islands down below were glittering like thousands of stars dotting the ocean, resonating with the light of the stars and the moon in the sky. For a moment, the world was filled with blue and silver light, which set off the dark purple seawater and the pale white mist. It was a magnificent scene, like a large bonsai inlaid in a crystal. Amidst the sea and sky, 37 heaven immortals, including Reverend Yao Yu, hovered in midair on clouds, each shrouded in an auspicious light. Each of them had the demeanor of an immortal, and a clear air was swirling around them. Their elegant temperament made Wu Qi clap his hands and praise them. What a group of sanctimonious cannon fodder! Hurry up and help me deal a serious blow to that green dome shark. Hiding in a cloud in the distance, Wu Qi saw Reverend Yao Yu give a few orders to the heaven immortals. After that, all 36 heaven immortals took out a black net and a black flag, and after cupping their fists to Reverend Yao Yu, they transformed into beams of light and disappeared into the islands down below. Judging from the direction in which they landed, they were exactly in the direction of the 36 celestial dippers. Reverend Yao Yu looked up at the moon, then made a grabbing gesture. A white cloud rushed out from beside him, wrapped in hundreds of roasted cows, their bodies glistening with yellow fat. Reverend Yao Yu carefully fished out a red medicine bottle and smeared the liquid on the roasted cows, which were still emitting faint steam. A strange aroma wafted into the distance and drifted to Wu Qi's side. Wu Qi sniffed as Ao Buzan poked his head out from under his clothes. How wicked! Using drunken dragon incense? It's a turbid drunken dragon incense that has not been mixed well. Your father, disdains to be fooled by this kind of lowly trash. Pressing Ao Buzan's head down and shoving him back into his clothes, Wu Qi said in a low voice, "Take your time to digest Flaming Tiger's divine power. It has been so long, and you still have the face to show yourself when you haven't completely digested it? It seems that the recipe of this drunken dragon incense is wrong, and the quality is really bad. Next time, I'll get you some pure, high-grade stuff to eat, okay?" Ao Buzan's face turned slightly pale as he obediently squeezed back into Wu Qi's clothes. On the surface of the ocean, Reverend Yao Yu threw over 100 roasted cows into the water. A strange aroma spread in the water and gradually seeped into the depths of the ocean. Time passed, and about 2 hours later, a large sheet of silver-green starlight suddenly emerged from the dark ocean. A huge fish, about 1,000 feet long and shaped like a shark, but with countless sharp protrusions on its skin, which made it look very ferocious-looking, slowly rose to the surface of the water. The fish was emanating a soft silver-green starlight, making it look like an extra-large light bulb. This was the green dome shark, an extremely rare primordial species. According to the scroll of stealing, every 360 years, the green dome shark would come to the surface of the ocean to absorb the essence of the stars and the moon, and when it had accumulated enough power of the stars, it would dive back into the deep ocean and sleep, gradually digesting the energy it had absorbed. During the 360 years of hibernation, if something attracted their attention, the green dome sharks would wake up from their hibernation to hunt for food. But at this time, the green dome shark's bloodline was not flowing smoothly, and its overall strength was at its lowest point. Especially when Wu Qi looked up at the sky. Tonight was the time when the yin energy between the heaven and earth was the strongest. The yin energy would rush up to the sky, and the dark clouds would cover the light of the stars and the moon. The green dome shark would not be able to borrow energy from the stars, and its overall strength would be greatly reduced. As he watched the green dome shark gradually rise to the surface, Wuqi put his hand into his bosom and pressed on a turtle shell, secretly informing the people in the distance to get ready to strike. Below Mount Moon gazing, above the ocean, Wuqi was ready to strike. Chapter 592. The green dome shark, whose eyes had obviously not opened yet, opened its mouth and swallowed the roasted cows that were floating on the surface of the ocean. All the roasted cows were cooked by Reverend Yao Yu with all kinds of rare and expensive spices. They did not taste very delicious, but their aroma was strong enough to spread far away, and when mixed with the water, it was a great temptation to all kinds of aquatic creatures. If not for the presence of this green dome shark, perhaps all the big fishes and sea beasts in the ocean would have rushed over and devoured all the roasted cows. In the next moment, a huge mouth opened on the surface of the ocean, and hundreds of roasted cows plunged into it amidst the splashing of water. The green dome shark lazily devoured all the roasted cows, then burped lazily and spewed out a foul gas from its mouth. With a flick of its huge tail, it created a silver-green whirlpool on the surface of the ocean and was about to sink back into the ocean to continue its slumber. Just then, a bright beam of light shot out from the top of Reverend Yao Yu's head, and a pearl about 10 feet in diameter shot whistling through the air and landed heavily on the green dome shark's head. A miserable howl rang out as the shark's head sank heavily into the water, sending a ring of water tens of miles high up into the air and spreading rapidly in all directions. Dozens of small islands were hit by the waves and shattered instantly, while huge rocks were carried hundreds of miles away by the waves. Mist rose into the air as water splashed down from the sky, producing a deafening rumble that sounded like a thunderclap on the surface of the ocean. The water splashed and fell onto the surface of the ocean, rocking the surface of the water, and the resulting wave threw the over 1,000 feet long body of the green dome shark high up into the air. A shrill roar filled with boundless rage burst out of its mouth, causing countless stars in the void to tremble. Starlight that was visible to the naked eye fell from the sky like raindrops and kept pouring into the shark's body. A large cloud rose from the bottom of the shark's body, holding it up in midair. The green dome shark slowly opened its eyes. No pupils could be seen in its eye sockets, as there were only 2 balls of blazing silver light in them. Suddenly, there was a flash of silver light as thousands of silver balls shot out of the shark's eyes and smashed toward Reverend Yao Yu like a thunderstorm. Suddenly, a huge iron umbrella, hundreds of feet in diameter, appeared in front of Reverend Yao Yu, spinning rapidly to block the silver rain of light. Deafening explosions kept ringing out. Every ball of silver light was a star ripple spirit-shattering thunder refined by the green dome shark's own alchemic fire, which contained a massive amount of star energy and the dark in-water essence of the deep sea. With each thunderclap, Reverend Yao Yu's body would be thrown hundreds of feet back, and the iron umbrella he used to protect himself would burst into a dazzling light, while a mottled mark would appear on the umbrella itself. Thousands of balls of star ripple spirit-shattering thunder exploded one after another, sending Reverend Yao Yu flying hundreds of miles away. The iron umbrella was torn to pieces, leaving only the handle and a few ribs intact. Reverend Yao Yu snorted coldly and threw the umbrella away. A bright light burst out of the pearl floating above his head, and suddenly, a very thin beam of blue light, as tiny as a silkworm, shot out of the pearl and landed on the green dome shark's head in a flash. A series of cracking noises rang out, and as soon as the blue light touched the shark, a large sheet of blue xianbing emerged from its body. In just the blink of an eye, the huge shark was frozen inside an iceberg that stood several miles tall. Reverend Yao Yu looked up at the moonlight, and an arc of light as thin as a hair shot out from between his brows, spinning rapidly and soaring into the sky. Large streams of moonlight flowed towards that beam of light like streams of water, while that beam of light let out a sharp buzzing noise. About 3 seconds later, the beam of light had absorbed a huge amount of moonlight and transformed into an indescribably thin, green blade of light that was miles long and tens of feet wide. Moon slaughter, go! Reverend Yao Yu's eyes went wide like a toad's as he snapped and waved both hands forward. 2 streams of vigorous immortal energy poured out of his body and injected into the giant blade of light that was still wheeling in the sky. A blinding light erupted from the lightsaber, and it tore through the air for hundreds of miles before accurately striking the iceberg that was hovering in midair hundreds of miles away. In just a fraction of a second, the blade of light had wheeled and hacked at the iceberg thousands of times. The iceberg shattered with a boom, revealing the huge body of the green dome shark. A strong green halo enveloped the shark's body, and when the saber beam slashed at the green halo, it only caused a large amount of green smoke to splatter in all directions, but it didn't hurt the green dome star shark at all. The green dome shark. This was where the chill of the two words green dome came from. It was an ancient species that could absorb all kinds of poisonous gases drifting in the deep sea, including the poisonous gases accumulated in the excretions of other big fishes and sea beasts, the poisonous metals and stones emitted by various poisonous ores, the poisonous plants in the water, and the venom secreted by sea snakes and sea beasts. In short, it could absorb all the poisonous substances in the deep sea into its body and turn them into the green dome of myriad poisons to protect itself. Reverend Yao Yu's giant blade of light had hacked and slashed thousands of times on the green dome of myriad poison. The blade of light, which had been flying at an incredible speed, had become slower and slower. Before long, it was covered with mottled green marks, which made it look like a decayed bronze, and produced an unpleasant creaking noise as it flew. Reverend Yao Yu was shocked. He waved his hand and recalled the giant blade of light. Then, with a wave of his hand, the green moonlight on the blade of light suddenly disintegrated and revealed a dazzling gleam. Surprisingly, the gleam was also covered with a large amount of green poisonous gas. Amidst Reverend Yao Yu's shrill roar, the gleam was cut in half. The green dome of myriad poisons was extremely powerful, and it had completely destroyed Reverend Yao Yu's proudest weapon, the moon-killing blade. Wu Qi was amused as he watched from a distance. He knew that the green dome shark was not easy to deal with. Although he coveted the beast's soul, it was too vicious. So, he decided to let Reverend Yao Yu join the fight first. With his fingers clasped on the turtle shell, Wu Qi was waiting for Reverend Yao Yu and the green dome shark to be completely bloodshot, and when Reverend Yao Yu could no longer escape, Mount Moon gazing would strike. "Evil creature, you're courting death." Reverend Yao Yu pointed a finger at the green dome shark and gnashed his teeth, his body trembling with anger. Although the moon-killing blade was not his prime immortal item, it was the defensive treasure he used to refine fiends when he attained the Tao. It had a very deep bond with him, and he had escaped from many disasters with the help of this treasure. As soon as they fought, the moon-killing blade was destroyed by the green dome shark. It made Reverend Yao Yu's heart twitch. Exasperated, Reverend Yao Yu let out a long cry, then suddenly transformed into a beam of light and sped toward the green dome shark. The pearl hovering above him unleashed streams of frigid water, which turned into a blizzard and swept toward the green dome shark. With a sway of his body, a bright light flickered in front of him as a palm-sized silver octagonal shield shot out a straight beam of light, colliding with the green dome of myriad poisons on the green dome shark's body and producing a dazzling rain of light. In addition to the octagonal shield, Reverend Yao Yu was accompanied by a huge transparent creature that looked like a jellyfish. The beautiful creature, whose body was pale blue and body was about a few miles long, was hovering amidst the snowstorm. Her 18 tentacles were gently waving in the air, and from time to time, she would shoot out arrows made of cold gleams towards the green dome shark. The green dome shark let out a sonorous cry, and at the same time, countless tiny beams of starlight shot out of the countless bumps on its skin, turning into a shower of light that shot in all directions. Emitting a silver-green glow, the rain of light drew a large arc in the air and shot toward Reverend Yao Yu at the same time like sentient creatures. The moon hung high in the sky, and the water rippled below. Amidst the hazy mist, a ferocious strange beast was fighting a Taoist who looked like an immortal. All sorts of light showered down from the sky, making the scene look like a dream. Sitting cross-legged amidst a white cloud, Wu Qi observed the scene with his chaotic divine eyes. He could not help but take out a bag of pine nuts that were shrouded in natural energy, break them open one by one, and shove them into his mouth. There was delicious food, and there was beautiful scenery. It was the ultimate bliss. All of a sudden, Reverend Yao Yu let out a miserable howl as the octagonal shield in front of him shattered with a boom. Dozens of light showers sprayed onto his body like a storm, knocking him high up into the air. The dozens of holes on his chest were the size of mung beans, and faint black smoke kept spewing out of them. With his keen eyes, Wu Qi saw that the skin and flesh on Reverend Yao Yu's chest were melting like snow under the sun. The green dome shark's poisonous gas was not to be underestimated, and Reverend Yao Yu's immortal body could not withstand its attack. Reverend Yao Yu sped up into the sky, looking like he was fleeing for his life. The green dome shark was ferocious by nature. After repelling Reverend Yao Yu, it paid no heed to the attack from the beautiful jellyfish-like creature. Braving the cold arrows, it soared into the sky and chased after Reverend Yao Yu. In the twinkling of an eye, the beautiful jellyfish-like creature spread its 18 tentacles at the same time and pounced on the shark at lightning speed. The tentacles emitted a large sheet of electric arcs as they coiled around the shark's body. They looked as light and delicate as smoke, but in fact, they were extremely tough. The 18 tentacles cut the green dome shark's skin like 18 steel blades, producing a sizzling noise while the electric currents scorched the shark's skin. Gradually, the tentacles sank into the shark's skin. The green dome shark cried out in pain, and the more it was in pain, the more it aroused its ferocious nature. It soared into the sky and pounced toward Reverend Yao Yu like a silver-green lightning bolt. Opening its mouth, it spat out large sheets of starlight and green smoke, shooting toward Reverend Yao Yu like a firework. Gritting his teeth, Reverend Yao Yu flew hundreds of miles into the sky, then suddenly cried out, "Fellow immortals, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for?" 36 heaven immortals rushed out at the same time and threw the nets in their hands into the sky. Immediately, the sky turned dark, and the void within 1,000 miles was completely shrouded in darkness. As they waved the flags in their hands, a chilly wind rose from the ground, and countless skeletal fiends rushed toward the green dome shark fearlessly while shrieking and shrieking. The heaven immortals roared with laughter as they disappeared into the dark smoke and chilly wind at the same time. Wu Qi rose to his feet excitedly. Reverend Yao Yu had used the formation, and there was going to be a good show. Chapter 593. The green dome shark was indeed an ancient species with a very powerful innate divine ability, and its cultivation base was even a few levels stronger than Reverend Yao Yu. As a result, Reverend Yao Yu had destroyed 3 immortal items in a row, and even his supreme treasure of fiend refinement was destroyed by the green dome of myriad poison. But the green dome shark also had a great weakness. It had to rely on seawater to survive, and once it was out of the water for a long time, both its physical strength and magic power would decline. When a green dome shark was out of the water for more than 6 hours, its combat strength would be no different from that of an ordinary lower-tier immortal. No matter how strong it was in the past, once it was out of the water for more than 6 hours, it would become an easy target to be slaughtered. In this dark space, the gravity was forcibly twisted by the magic power of the formation, and a strong suction force came from all directions. Those who were trapped in the formation could not tell where the sky was and where the sea was. For the green dome shark, who was eager to rush out of the formation and return to the sea, it was very likely that it had gone the wrong way. But Reverend Yao Yu would not give it the chance to return to the sea. Even though the green dome shark's cultivation base was a few levels stronger than him, and was almost as strong as a top-tier heaven immortal, how could Reverend Yao Yu be unprepared when he came here to kill it? A sharp whistling sound towered into the sky as a wheel of blades appeared over Reverend Yao Yu's head. It was more than 1,000 feet in diameter, with a shaft several feet thick in the middle, and thousands of razors as thin as cicadas' wings on top and bottom of it. As soon as the purple-gold wheel of blades appeared, a pressure that made one tremble came crashing down. The green dome shark trembled as it stared at the huge wheel in horror. A hazy glow surrounded the wheel, and each of the razors was surrounded by 3 to 5 runes the size of a water tank. A vast and murderous aura kept spreading out of the wheel, so strong that even Reverend Yao Yu could not bear it. Wu Qi, who had sneaked into the formation to watch the battle, sucked in a cold breath. His eyes shone as he stared at the huge wheel of blades, and he nearly spat saliva out of his mouth. This was a gold immortal artifact, and there was no doubt that it was a gold immortal artifact used by a gold immortal. Although its grade was not high, about the standard of an 18th grade golden immortal instrument, its power and ingenuity were worlds apart from a heaven immortal instrument. The aura emanating from this gold immortal item made Wu Qi's hair stand on end even though he was hundreds of miles away. Looking at the huge wheel, Wu Qi's eyes were filled with blazing heat. Unfortunately, Wu Qi also knew that gold immortal artifacts were not something that he could use right now. Although his fleshly body had indeed reached the level of a first-tier heavenly immortal, his magic power and divine abilities were still far from reaching that level. Shaking his head helplessly, Wu Qi turned his attention to the battle. Sensing that something was wrong, the green dome shark howled and charged in a random direction. Even Wu Qi could not help but smile wryly for the unlucky shark. The formation had disturbed the gravity, making it impossible to tell where the sky was and where the earth was. The poor fellow had chosen a direction that was the furthest away from the ocean, and it was flying straight into the sky. The 18 tentacles of the jellyfish clinging to its body kept entangling it, slowing down the shark's flying speed. Gusts of chilly wind kept blowing at it from the formation, slowing it down as well. Amidst the chilly wind and black smoke, countless bony fiends flew up, baring their teeth and slamming into the shark like a meteor shower. Every time they slammed into the shark, the speed of the shark slowed down a little. There were countless fiends in the formation, howling shrilly as they kept pouncing at the shark. The thick layer of green dome of myriad poison around the shark's body was corroding these fiends' bodies, melting their bones and turning them into specks of dust. However, there were just too many fiends coming at it. The formation spanning 1,000 miles in diameter was filled with these bizarre-looking, bony fiends. When 1,000 fiends were corroded, 10,000 came charging at it. When 10,000 fiends were corroded, 100,000 came charging at it. When 100,000 fiends were corroded, 1,000,000 came charging at it. It was unknown which outer space the formation had communicated with, but countless fiends came roaring and charging at the green dome shark without any regard for their own lives. A quarter of an hour later, a huge ball of bones, about 100 miles in diameter, had formed around the green dome shark. Countless fiends were wriggling, roaring, and scratching at the shark's body with all their might. Shrill cracking noises lingered in the air. As the ball was too heavy, some of the fiends were crushed into pieces by their companions. The bone fragments piled up on the fiends and gradually melted into their bodies like flowing water. Gradually, some of the fiends that absorbed the bone fragments grew larger and larger. In just a quarter of an hour, the number of fiends in the ball had been reduced by 100 times, but the size of the remaining fiends had also increased by 100 times. The jellyfish, which was shooting out powerful electric bolts, kept entangling the green dome shark. The jellyfish did not have a corporeal body, but a body composed entirely of electric currents and cold air. It completely ignored the terrible damage inflicted by the green dome of myriad poison, and focused on binding, entangling, and strangling the shark. It was crazily tearing the shark's body and dragging it toward the fiends. The fiends, who had grown larger, reached out their sharp claws and tore the shark's body madly, bringing up large amounts of sparks and starlight on its tough skin. The green dome shark let out a shrill and unpleasant howl. It sensed the impending crisis, and it could not wait to break out of the formation. But the formation was extremely bizarre, and it was designed to target the shark's weakness. So, how could it break out in a short time? At this moment, its flying speed was so fast that even an ordinary mortal old lady could walk faster than it. How long would it take to rush out of this 1,000-mile wide array formation? Reverend Yao Yu hovered in midair. He had consumed a few pills to temporarily stop the green dome shark's poisonous gas from attacking his body, and had focused all his energy on the huge wheel of blades hovering over his head. The purple gold wheel was spinning slowly as he performed an incantation gesture and recited an incantation, constantly injecting his immortal energy into it. It was a gold immortal item, and he could not control it at all. He could only rely on incantation gestures and hand incantation gestures to drain his immortal energy and blood essence into it. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes as he looked at the huge wheel of blades. The purple-gold wheel was glinting brilliantly and full of spirituality. It was a gold immortal item with an owner. In other words, its owner was somewhere on Pangu continent, and Reverend Yao Yu was just borrowing it for the time being. Reverend Yao Yu kept performing incantation gestures and incantation gestures, so he should have learned the incantation and incantation gestures from the original owner of the wheel. But, even if he had learned the method, it was still not something he could control in a short time. Judging from the way things were going, he would not be able to control the gold immortal item to attack the enemy for him in less than an hour. Shaking his head, Wu Qi murmured under his breath, "The green dome shark is not so easy to deal with. It's true that its body is full of treasures, but if you want to get those treasures, how can you do that without paying some price? Who cares? All I want is the green dome shark's true soul, and you just have to kill it. What does the rest have to do with me?" The wheel began to tremble, and its terrible aura grew stronger. Wu Qi felt a suffocation in his chest, and he could not help but take a few steps back. The green dome shark, who bore the brunt of the attack, could sense the terrible killing intent coming from the wheel. The unlucky fellow roared at the top of his lungs, and the green dome of myriad poisons around him retracted into his body. All the skeletal fiends leaped inwards and plunged their sharp claws deep into the shark's body, causing a great amount of green blood to spray out of the wounds. A shrill cry rang out as the shark's body expanded rapidly, from over 1,000 feet long to 100 miles long. After a series of battles, the slumbering green dome shark had finally awakened from its deep sleep, and it had mustered all its strength to return to its original form. The huge horny protrusions on its body let out a sharp whistling sound, and a large amount of green gas shot out like countless arrows, blasting those huge white-boned fiends into pieces. White bones flew all over the sky, and soon they turned into rotten dust in the green gas and fell to the ground. The jellyfish tied to the green dome shark let out a miserable hiss as its tentacles were broken by the shark's suddenly expanding body. Then, a dazzling beam of starlight shot out of the shark's mouth and blasted the jellyfish into countless drifting electric arcs and cold air fragments. The shark opened its mouth and gave Reverend Yao Yu a ferocious, human-like smile. The green smoke and starlight flickered all over its body and gradually condensed into a huge ball of light several miles in diameter next to its mouth. This was the strongest attack of the green dome shark, the moon-shattering star spirit dispersing thunder. Every strike would consume half of their energy. Ordinary immortal items could not defend against such a powerful attack. Cold sweat kept oozing out of Reverend Yao Yu's forehead. He had never dreamed that this big fellow could be so fierce and savage. Seeing that the green dome shark was about to spit out the thunderbolt, he quickly bit the tip of his tongue and spat out 3 mouthfuls of his prime blood essence. 3 blinding beams of blood-red light were injected into the wheel, and it moved abruptly. Finally, the gold immortal item had absorbed enough immortal energy, so it began to spin rapidly. For a moment, the only sound that could be heard was the sound of blades tearing through the void. But as the saying goes, the loudest sound is louder than the loudest sound. When Wu Qi heard the loud noise, he could not describe what it was. He could only watch as the wheel spun rapidly, and the surrounding void was stirred into a mess by the thousands of huge blades on it. The thunderbolt shot whistling out of the green dome shark's mouth, and at the same time, the wheel plunged down with a dazzling beam of golden light. The thunderbolt was drawn into the wheel, and a loud boom rang out as it bounced tens of miles up into the air. The thunderbolt exploded, and Reverend Yao Yu was hit by a stray thunderbolt, leaving a fist-sized hole in his chest. He howled miserably as he was thrown tens of miles away. Then, the wheel fell rapidly, slicing through the green dome shark's body in just a flash. A miserable howl rang out as the wheel turned into a beam of golden light and shot into the sky, disappearing without a trace. The green dome shark hovered in midair. Half of its body had been cut into pieces, and its body was riddled with deep wounds, each about a mile long. Large amounts of green blood were spraying out of the wounds, and the shark was nearly cut into pieces. At that moment, the surrounding heaven and earth suddenly shook. The natural energy towered into the sky, completely blocking out the moonlight and starlight, while dark clouds covered the entire land. Today was the time of extreme and the natural energy had blanketed everything. Chapter 594. The green dome shark let out a shrill cry. It had been more than 2 hours since it had left the water, and now, it was at the end of its tether. Hovering in midair with half of its broken body, its eyes glinting with dazzling starlight fixed on Reverend Yao Yu. It was ready to fight to the death. But the energy in the air was so strong that it had overshadowed the light of the stars and the moon. The power of the stars in the void was decreasing rapidly. The green dome shark opened its mouth wide and sucked crazily, but it could not absorb even a tiny bit of the power. The green dome shark, which was severely injured by the gold immortal artifact and had little energy left in its body, was at a loss. It could not figure out what was going on. Why did the power of the stars that flowed like water around it disappear completely? Reverend Yao Yu, with a large hole in his chest and covered in blood, slowly descended from the sky. Staring fixedly at the green dome shark, he laughed in a deep voice and said, "A beast will always be a beast. Even though your cultivation base is much higher than mine, you still fell into my hands. All the treasures you have are very valuable. Especially that crystal core of yours, The green dome shark took a deep breath, but the air it inhaled quickly gushed out from the broken part of its body. It did not even have the last bit of strength left in its body to move. It was already very lucky that it could survive the violent attack from a gold immortal artifact. The last bit of strength in its body was slowly draining away, flowing out of its body along with the little blood that was left in its body. Staring at Reverend Yao Yu with hatred, a crisp cracking sound suddenly rang out of the green dome shark's body. Reverend Yao Yu's face fell. "How dare you, evil creature!" he growled at the top of his voice. "Spit out the crystal core, and I'll spare your life. But, if you dare to break it, I'll capture your soul and send you to the 9 nether hell to suffer the endless torture." The green dome shark's body slowly shrank, and a strong green gas, starlight, sprayed out of its body. After losing the last chance to strike, the ferocious green dome shark burned all its blood essence, preparing to self-detonate and perish together with Reverend Yao Yu. And when Reverend Yao Yu told it that his target was its inner core, it actually mustered the last bit of its strength and was gradually crushing its inner core, which was the strongest and also the source of all its power. Hiding amidst the chilly wind and dark smoke, Wu Qi looked at this big fellow with satisfaction, who would rather die in glory than live in dishonor. "Burn, let all of your blood essence burn. Shatter the crystal core and burn it along with all the blood essence." When all the remaining energy in the body was burned, the soul of the green dome shark would reach an unprecedented peak. At that time, the green dome shark's body would shatter and the soul would be captured. The beast soul obtained would be the perfect green dome shark beast soul. On top of that, the sentience in the beast soul would also be shattered by the huge impact of the energy. A beast soul like this, which had retained the instinct to strike a final desperate blow before death, but had lost its sentience, leaving only an instinctive ferocious aura, was perfect to be refined into the item spirit of an immortal item. Wu Qi's face twisted and gradually turned into the appearance of a weathered old man. He gently rubbed his hands, and there was a vague chaotic light flickering between them. The green dome shark's body was shrinking rapidly, and gradually, it was only about 10,000 feet long. The light shooting out of its body was getting stronger and stronger, and gradually, there seemed to be a tiny shadow of a green dome shark, about a foot long, looming over its head. Reverend Yao Yu was so anxious that he almost coughed blood. "Fellow immortals, I'll double the reward I promised," he cried out sternly. "Kill this evil beast's body and take out its inner core. Don't let it self-detonate. Otherwise, we'll all be in big trouble." The self-detonation of an ordinary nascent divinity cultivator could destroy everything within 100 miles. The green dome shark's cultivation base was similar to that of a peak-level heaven immortal, and if it were to detonate its body at all costs, the power would be enough to shatter the stars in the sky. Reverend Yao Yu could escape with his mighty cultivation base, but none of the 36 heaven immortals present would be spared. Amidst Reverend Yao Yu's howl, 36 panicked heaven immortals emerged from the black smoke. They raised their swords at the same time, and with a shrill whistle, 36 immortal swords slashed through the air toward the rapidly shrinking green dome shark. At the same time, they began to chant incantations and perform incantation gestures, unleashing all kinds of immortal thunders that contained fire, water vapor, golden light, and cold light. Immortal thunders of different attributes and powers smashed down toward the green dome shark like raindrops. The green dome shark let out a continuous cry. It paid no attention to the attacks of these heaven immortals, focusing on burning its blood essence and crushing its inner core, getting ready to fight Reverend Yao Yu to the death. If these ancient mutated beasts had not cultivated into a human form, their intelligence would not be very high. Right now, this big guy was only thinking about risking his life. How could he care about the sparks and flesh splattering all over his body from the explosion? Accompanied by a shrill cry, the green dome shark grew smaller and smaller, causing the heaven immortals to scream in fear. The smaller the green dome shark was, the more likely it would explode at any time. Now that it had shrunk to less than 1,000 feet, who knew when it would explode and take away the lives of everyone present? Reverend Yao Yu clenched his teeth so tightly that blood was oozing out from between his teeth. "Evil creature, you are indeed an evil creature," he cried out sternly. Reverend Yao Yu pointed his finger out, and the 10 feet in diameter pearl hovering over his head burst into a bright light. "If you don't hand over your inner core, I don't want to live anymore," he bellowed furiously. Reverend Yao Yu was so angry that he could not even speak properly. He held the pearl with both hands, and a large amount of golden blood kept gushing out of his palms and slowly flowing into the pearl like smoke. After being nourished by Reverend Yao Yu's blood essence, the pearl had gradually shrunk like the green dome shark. In just a few seconds, Reverend Yao Yu's face had turned pale like a zombie. His body was shivering, and the pearl had shrunk to the size of a bowl, emitting a cold gleam that even Wu Qi could not look at with his chaotic divine eyes. The green dome shark fixed its eyes on Reverend Yao Yu, and Reverend Yao Yu stared back at it. The man and the shark were like lovers who had not seen each other for 10,000 reincarnations, staring at each other with an unforgettable look, as if they were trying to brand each other's appearance deeply into their souls. The 36 heaven immortals kept howling and hacking at the green dome shark's body with their immortal swords, each bringing forth a great deal of blood. Countless immortal thunders smashed down like raindrops, smashing the green dome shark into a bloody mess. But the green dome shark did not make a sound at the moment, just staring at Reverend Yao Yu, just as Reverend Yao Yu was staring at it. Wu Qi nodded. He pulled out the turtle shell from his pocket, and a wisp of mist shot out of his fingertip and slowly fused into it. He had informed the soldiers and oracles at the foot of Mount Moon Gazing that they were ready to strike, as all of Reverend Yao Yu's spirit was attracted by the green dome shark. The green dome shark took a deep breath. Its body had shrunk to only about 10 feet long. A dense cloud of silver and green smoke had wrapped around it, and it was constantly being absorbed into its body. The pearl hovering over Reverend Yao Yu's head had shrunk to the size of a thumb. At the moment, it had lost all its light, and there was only a hazy mist hovering around it, making it look hazy and blurry. A fist-sized, pale green spirit orb slowly emerged from the top of the green dome shark's head. The orb was covered with countless cracks, and it was its inner core. The shark had tried its best to suppress it, but as it was severely injured, it could no longer completely crush the core. Therefore, it threw the core out of its body, preparing to use it as a magical treasure to attack the enemy. No matter what, it had to fight Reverend Yao Yu until both of them were severely injured. Reverend Yao Yu stared fixedly at the core, gritted his teeth and said, "Evil creature, how could you hurt my treasure like that? You deserve to die 1,000 times over." Before his voice could fade away, a golden cicada the size of a finger suddenly flew out of his belt, its thin wings flapping rapidly and letting out a shrill, unpleasant cry. Reverend Yao Yu, who was concentrating on circulating his energy and preparing to fight the green dome shark, was startled by the cry and nearly coughed up a mouthful of blood from his nostrils. He stared at the cicada, which he had given to his descendants as a messenger in times of crisis, and heard the shrill cry. Only he knew the meaning behind it. A powerful enemy was attacking the mountain, and his clan would be wiped out. Reverend Yao Yu howled at the top of his voice. "Who is it? Who is so bold? How dare you attack my Mount Moon gazing?" Taking advantage of the moment when Reverend Yao Yu was distracted, Wu Qi rushed out. He did not even bother to look at those lower-tier heaven immortals. With both hands locked into a strange incantation gesture that looked like a goat's horn, he pressed it hard on Reverend Yao Yu's back. Wisps of phosphorescence rushed out of his fingertips and plunged into Reverend Yao Yu's back. Reverend Yao Yu howled miserably as a cracking sound rang out from his spine, which was nearly broken by Wu Qi. An enormous amount of energy rushed into his body and interrupted the flow of immortal energy in his body. "Green Dome Shark, I'll gladly accept this treasure." Wu Qi squeezed out a hoarse voice and laughed strangely. Reverend Yao Yu gave a furious roar as he waved his hand backhandedly, sending out a sword beam that pierced the foreheads of all 36 heaven immortals present. Then he uttered a sharp incantation, and the bodies of all 36 heaven immortals exploded with a boom, as if they had mustered all their immortal energy and immortal souls. Amidst the deafening explosion, Reverend Yao Yu shot up into the sky in a beam of light and cried out, "Old fool, I'll pay you back 10,000 times for what you've done today." With a flicker of his body, Reverend Yao Yu abruptly teleported away. The enormous stream of energy that Wu Qi had poured into his body just now obediently followed Reverend Yao Yu's teleportation magic and helped him travel a great distance with ease. Looking at Reverend Yao Yu, who was fleeing with severe injuries, Wu Qi murmured, run as far as you can. Don't let those fellows take all your wealth for themselves." Laughing strangely, Wu Qi waved both hands and shattered the shockwaves produced by the self-detonation of 36 heaven immortals. Then he threw a punch towards the green dome shark, who was dumbfounded. The punch hit the green dome shark's head and smashed its broken body into pieces. Grabbing the shark's soul, Wu Qi was about to throw his head back and laugh when a suffocating pressure suddenly came whistling toward him from the sky. Wu Qi's expression flickered as he cried out in alarm, "Damn it! A gold immortal?" Before he could give the shark's soul a good look, Wu Qi hastily turned into a wisp of smoke and fled. Chapter 595. When he was far away, Wu Qi quickly turned his head back to look at the spot where Reverend Yao Yu and the green dome shark had fought desperately. A huge wheel of blades was hovering in the air, emitting a dazzling purple-gold light. A skinny white-clothed Taoist was standing on top of it, muttering something in exasperation. Wu Qi nodded. Reverend Yao Yu was really unlucky. He knew very well that the gold immortal item he used to severely injure the green dome shark must have been rented through the internal channel of Myriad Immortal Alliance. Wu Qi wondered how much he had paid to rent the gold immortal item for the chance to strike the shark with all his might. After the strike, the gold immortal item quickly turned into a beam of light and sped away. The white-clothed Taoist must have completed the transaction and taken it back. Clearly, the Taoist had smelled the aura of the green dome shark from the wheel of blades. He knew that it was a rare ancient species, and its body was full of useful treasures. That was why he came here on his magical treasure. But it was a pity that Reverend Yao Yu had fled in panic, and Wu Qi had taken away the most precious soul of the green dome shark, leaving him with only some broken fleshly body fragments. The green dome shark, which had burned all its blood essence and its inner core, did not leave anything good behind but a pile of ashes. If this gold immortal of Myriad Immortal Alliance was interested, he could bring the ashes back and worship them. With a malicious smile on his face, Wu Qi sped away. He now had a greater understanding of Myriad Immortal Alliance. As long as he was willing to pay a certain price, not only could he hire powerful immortals to help him kill and avenge himself, he could even rent a gold immortal item. He wondered if Myriad Immortal Alliance could rent a primordial immortal item from a primordial immortal. Perhaps, No one could afford to pay such a high price, right? With all sorts of strange thoughts running through his mind, Wu Qi streaked across the void with a faint layer of Shen energy, and before long he had returned to Mount Moon gazing. The once bustling Yaoyu immortal market had turned into a sea of fire, with thousands of corpses of immortals and itinerant cultivators lying on the beach. All the buildings were engulfed in flames, and shrill cries could be faintly heard coming from within the sea of fire. Those were the civilians hired by the celestial market, struggling and crying for help. Dozens of armored soldiers were walking back and forth outside the immortal market. From time to time, they would shake their hands and throw a few large fireballs at the buildings that were not very badly burned. The powerful immortals and itinerant cultivators had all been slaughtered by the armored soldiers, leaving only tens of thousands of civilians in the market. They were either shopkeepers, waiters, or even brothels prostitutes. These people simply had no power to resist the fire released by the spell. They could only howl a few times in the sea of fire before being burned to ashes. The bodies of these people were gradually melted into fat by the fire and mixed with the collapsed pillars, which made the fire even more intense. In the black smoke, one could vaguely see the souls of the dead flying helplessly into the sky, helplessly looking at the void distorted by the heat of the fire. Not long after, dozens of whirlpool-like black doors suddenly appeared in the void. A powerful suction force came from these doors, sucking these souls in. They were the emissaries of hell who had come to receive the souls of the dead. Wu Qi looked curiously at these black doors. It was the first time he had seen what the people on Pangu continent looked like after they died. He had fought many battles on Pangu continent, but he had never encountered an opportunity where a large number of souls could survive. What surprised Wu Qi was that several of these black doors were glowing with a pale golden Buddhist light, and he could vaguely hear deep chanting coming out of them. Through the chaotic divine eyes, he could vaguely see figures shrouded in a Buddhist light behind the doors. As the deep chanting echoed, hundreds of souls among the mortals who had been burned to death floated happily toward the few doors that were glowing with Buddhist light. Several pitch-black doors emitting shrill ghost howls blocked the way of the souls who were chanting Buddhist mantras, bent on sucking them in. But very fine beams of light immediately shot out of the few doors that were glowing with a faint Buddhist light and smashed heavily onto them. Wu Qi heard faint cries of rebuke and misery coming from the void as the doors shattered with a boom, and hundreds of souls who were chanting Buddhist mantras flew safely into them. TSK, there is a back door of the Buddhist League in hell? Wu Qi looked at the scene in horror, thinking that he would have to find out more about it later. If the cultivators of the Buddhist League were really so powerful, he would have to be careful. After all, he had once offended the disciples of a great bodhisattva and killed many of his disciples. The strange phenomenon lasted less than the time to finish a pot of tea. After tens of thousands of souls were sucked into the doors, the black doors gradually disappeared, and the last skyscraper in Yaoyu Immortal Market collapsed. The huge main beam smashed to the ground and sent up countless sparks. The twisting flame illuminated Mount Moon gazing off to the side. From time to time, various thunderbolts and lightning bolts burst out from the vast mountain, while muffled booms of explosions kept ringing out. Led by dozens of captains whose cultivation bases were as strong as heaven immortals, hundreds of heavily armored soldiers were hovering in midair, attacking a defensive barrier around a few pavilions on top of Mount Moon gazing. Meanwhile, hundreds of oracles were hovering in midair, raining down thunderbolts, lightning bolts, wild winds, and fire spells. Apart from strange and unpredictable curses, oracles of the human race were also proficient in all kinds of natural attacks of the 5 elements. Hundreds of oracles were like hundreds of mobile turrets. With a wave of their hands, a great number of thunderbolts would fall, and with a slight cough, dozens of fireballs, each measuring about 10 feet in circumference, would tumble down from the sky. If 3 to 5 oracles joined hands to launch an attack, they could casually throw large meteors down from the sky, shrouded in scorching flames. Compared to the immortal spells of immortals, the power of each wave of attack from oracles might not be as powerful as that of immortals, but the frequency of their attacks was too high. Immortals often had to perform incantation gestures and incantation spells for a long while before they could unleash a single immortal thunderbolt, but oracles could unleash a storm of attacks with just a wave of their hands. Quantity made up for the difference in quality. Hundreds of oracles attacked at the same time, enveloping the entire peak of Mount Moon gazing with fiery light, and causing the once stable defensive formation to tremble violently. Meanwhile, hundreds of armored soldiers hovered in midair, wielding heavy blades, spears, swords, and halberds, and smashed at the defensive formation. Occasionally, the formation bounced back some thunderbolts and struck these heavily armored soldiers, but they could not even hurt their hair. Every heavy blow from these armored soldiers would cause the grand formation to rumble loudly, and the foundation of the grand formation would gradually show signs of collapse. The pavilions on the mountaintop were crowded with frightened people. There were cultivators and mortals, but more than 80% of them were cultivators. About 3,000 people were sheltering in the last defensive formation, and sitting in the pavilion in the center, with a few heaven immortals and dozens of nascent divinity cultivators, was none other than Reverend Yao Yu, who had fled in a hurry after being severely injured. Reverend Yao Yu's face was ferocious, and his whole body was covered in pale golden blood. His body was trembling violently, and with every incantation gesture he struck, golden blood would spray out of the wounds on his body. The blood had accumulated to a thick layer on the ground, and no one knew how he could have so much blood flowing out of his body. Reverend Yao Yu, who was handsome and elegant, now looked like an evil ghost. He kept striking incantation gestures to stabilize the formation, while looking up at the oracles and armored soldiers who were besieging it and snapped, "Is your prefecture overseer crazy? You've besieged me today, but when I'm free, I'll definitely kill every last one of you in High Province." Grinning hideously, the armored soldiers and oracles just kept attacking the formation, not bothering to talk to Reverend Yao Yu. If Reverend Yao Yu had not suddenly returned, the formation would have long been breached by these oracles and armored soldiers, and all 3,000 of his family members would have been captured alive by them according to Wu Qi's order. However, Reverend Yao Yu's speed was too fast, so fast that it was beyond everyone's expectation. That was why he was able to rush into the formation and hold on until now. Wu Qi smiled satisfactorily. The energy he had poured into Reverend Yao Yu's body just now was to speed up his return, so that he could teleport back as fast as possible. Otherwise, if these oracles and armored soldiers had breached Mount Moon gazing and kept some of the spoils, Wu Qi would have suffered a great loss. These oracles and armored soldiers were the private guards of Yu clan, and they only obeyed Yu Mu's command. So, it was only natural for them to hide the richest part of the spoils. But Reverend Yao Yu had returned just in time, and the formation had held on until now. When Wu Qi returned, it would be impossible for these oracles and armored soldiers to hide the spoils. At most, they could take away some insignificant profits from the immortal market, but the richest part, Mount Moon gazing, would have to wait for Wu Qi's return. Wu Qi roared with laughter as he revealed himself in the void. Hovering above the oracles and soldiers, he pointed a finger at Reverend Yao Yu and cried out, "The former prefecture overseer of High Province has fled for his crimes of corruption and perverted the law. The current prefecture overseer is Yu Mu, the lineal descendant of Yu clan in Zhong Province. I'm the new military minister of High Province, Tan Lang. Demon Taoist Yao Yu, why don't you surrender now? What are you waiting for?" As his voice echoed out, Wu Qi clenched his right fist and threw it down. A loud boom rang out as the southwest foundation of the formation collapsed, and a tower made of golden bricks shattered. A few of Reverend Yao Yu's descendants, who were filling the core of the formation with immortal stones and energy stones, howled miserably as they were smashed by the nearly 10 feet long golden bricks, their bones broken and tendons torn, and they died on the spot. The collapse of the foundation triggered a chain reaction almost immediately, and the whole formation collapsed, revealing the pavilions and 3,000 of Reverend Yao Yu's clan members. Reverend Yao Yu cried out in alarm. A dazzling light burst out of his body as he soared into the sky, and the spirit pearl, about 10 feet in diameter, sprayed out a great sheet of cold air as it smashed down toward Wu Qi. The pearl was a precious treasure that Reverend Yao Yu had cultivated with his life. As soon as the cold air came out, the oracles and armored soldiers in the sky could not withstand it any longer, and they began to flee in all directions. Wu Qi shook his head and said mockingly, "You are at the end of your rope. Do you really think you can pierce through the silk?" Suddenly, dozens of illusions that looked exactly like him appeared around Wu Qi. A small village appeared in the void, surrounded by countless pedestrians and shops, and soon, Reverend Yao Yu was enveloped in it. Hiding in the illusion, Wu Qi approached Reverend Yao Yu without making a sound, then threw a heavy punch at the latter's forehead. Reverend Yao Yu, who was exhausted and had almost exhausted his immortal energy, fell to the ground and fell down from the sky. Putting away the spirit pearl, Wu Qi pointed at the crying men and women, old and young, and said with a cold grin, "Capture them all alive. Don't let any of them escape." The oracles and armored soldiers, who had been fighting for a whole night, rushed forward like wolves and tigers. Chapter 596. 3 oracles from the Directorate of Celestials, shrouded in dark smoke, flew over. They pulled out 360 black needles, each measuring 3 feet and 6 inches long and as fine as a cow's hair, and stabbed them into 360 vital acupoints on Reverend Yao Yu's body. The needle was a vicious magical artifact crafted by the Directorate of Celestials. It was called the Immortal Detaining Needle. If a top-grade gold immortal was pierced by the needle and formed into the immortal detaining spirit severing formation in his body, he would have no choice but to become a prisoner of the Directorate of Celestials. The needles went into the unconscious Reverend Yao Yu's body, stretching out along his meridians and blood vessels. When the needles in all the acupoints touched each other, they immediately fused together like mercury. The 3 oracles moved as fast as lightning, and in just a few breaths of time, all the needles had gone into Reverend Yao Yu's body. Using his chaotic divine eyes, Wu Qi saw that a large black net had appeared in Reverend Yao Yu's body. As his acupoints were broken, the immortal energy in his body kept leaking out of his body through the net. Before long, there was not even a drop of immortal energy left in his body. The net had also cut off his connection with the natural energy, so even if he woke up, he could not extract any natural energy from the world, and he could not restore his magic power. The needle was hollow, and it was filled with a black powder secretly concocted by the Directorate of Celestials. As the black powder spread through his body, it paralyzed his muscles, tendons, and bones, turning his well-tempered heaven immortal body limp and weak. At this moment, he only had the strength of a burly mortal man, and there was no chance for him to fight back before the oracles and armored soldiers of the Directorate of Celestials. As the medicinal powder spread through his body, the soreness in his muscles and bones caused by the medicinal powder woke him up. With great difficulty, he opened his eyes and looked at the half-inch-long needles sticking out of all the acupoints on his body, as well as the pale golden immortal energy that kept spreading through them. He could not help but laugh bitterly and say, "Immortal detaining needles? Hee, I've long heard of the famous immortal detaining needles, but I never thought I would have the chance to experience it myself." Taking a deep breath, Reverend Yao Yu stared at Wu Qi and snapped, "Tan Lang, do you know that I'm from Myriad Immortal Alliance?" Wu Qi stamped his foot on Reverend Yao Yu's mouth, crushing half of his teeth and filling his mouth with blood and broken teeth, forcing him to swallow the blood and teeth into his stomach. The sharp teeth scratched his throat, nearly killing him with pain and suffocation. As a high-tier heaven immortal, when had he ever suffered like this? He was in so much pain and anger that he almost died from anger. Union of 10,000 immortals? Wu Qi put on a fake smile and said intentionally, "I've never heard of it. Are the people of the Union of 10,000 immortals that great?" After kicking Reverend Yao Yu a few times, Wu Qi pointed at the exposed pavilion and cried out, "Somebody, capture everyone alive and tie them up." "Hey Huangliang? Huangliang? Bastard, what are you doing? Hurry up and count the treasures in the storehouse of Mount Moon Gazing and record all the treasures. I still need to share the harvest with His Excellency Prefecture Overseer." Huang Liang had come out of nowhere. With a big smile on his face, he hurriedly pulled up his pants and tightened his belt. Wu Qi glanced over his shoulder. The door of the pavilion from which Huang Liang had just come out was wide open, and through it, Wu Qi saw a young girl lying on the ground. The girl's clothes were completely torn, and the roots of her two snow-white thighs were a mess of blood. Nodding and bowing, Huang Liang bowed and said, "Your Excellency, I'm here. I'll go and check all the treasures in the storehouse right away." Wu Qi nodded slowly. Pointing at the pavilion, he said in a low voice, "That girl is your personal property. Bring her back to Ningbo City and enjoy yourself." After a brief pause, Wu Qi scolded, "If you dare to do something like this again, I'll cut off your penis." Huang Liang covered his crotch with both hands and said with a dry smile, "I know my mistake. I won't make the same mistake again." While babbling, Huang Liang kept nodding and bowing as he backed away, fully playing the role of a lackey. With great difficulty, Reverend Yao Yu turned his head and gave the pavilion a glance, then suddenly roared, "That's my youngest great-granddaughter." Wu Qi stamped his foot on Reverend Yao Yu's head, forcing all the curses back into his stomach. "Have you not done such a thing before?" snapped Wu Qi. "Today, your full moon mountain has suffered such a great calamity. Did you ever think of today's retribution when you forced others in the past?" Reverend Yao Yu's eyes went wide as he stared at Wu Qi and squeezed a few words out of his mouth. "Son of a bitch, I'm going to kill you." Wu Qi frowned and shook his head, then summoned a few oracles from the Directorate of Celestials and gave them some instructions in a low voice. The oracles nodded knowingly, then took out specially made talismans that were tens of feet long and each as wide as a palm, wrapping them around Reverend Yao Yu dozens of times. With these talismans coiled around his body, he did not even have the strength to shatter the top of his head and escape with his immortal soul. Fearing that Reverend Yao Yu still had some mystic arts, the oracles pierced all the important joints of his body with specially made chains, tying him up like a rice dumpling. Among Reverend Yao Yu's children and grandchildren, there were only 5 lower-tier heaven immortals, and the strongest among them was only in the realm of nascent divinity. Faced with the ferocious oracles and heavy-armored soldiers, Reverend Yao Yu's children and grandchildren had lost the courage to resist. Including the 5 heaven immortals, they were all captured and suppressed by the oracles with magical artifacts. Wu Qi shook his head as he watched. Reverend Yao Yu was extremely fierce to outsiders, and he could tell from the way he hunted down Princess Zhang Lu and her companions that he was not a soft-hearted man. But he was indeed a good patriarch to his children and clansmen. He had almost single-handedly taken care of everything in Mount Moon Gazing, and all his clansmen were living a carefree life under his wing. This was the greatest tragedy of Mount Moon Gazing. They had been living free and unfettered for too long that they did not even know how to fight. When they lost Reverend Yao Yu, their backbone, they were easily captured by the men brought by Wu Qi. There were 3,497 people in total, and soon, the total number of captives was reported. These people were Reverend Yao Yu's wives and children, his direct clan members. Mount Moon Gazing used to have a large number of common people at their beck and call, and there were tens of thousands of servants and maids. But, when the attack on the mountain began, Reverend Yao Yu's clansmen had abandoned the defensive formation and retreated to the top of the mountain in defeat. As a result, the maids were killed by the aftermath of the attack, and only less than 2,000 of them survived. These thousands of servants and maids were all enslaved by Wu Qi's order, and were going to be brought back to Ningbo City to be sold. As a matter of fact, even without Wu Qi's order, Great Yu Dynasty had never been kind to these common people who had served the enemy. Any common person who had worked for itinerant cultivators would often end up with their entire clan executed. It was already a very merciful way for Wu Qi to just sell these people as slaves. In high spirits, Huang Liang ordered hundreds of armored soldiers and strong men selected from the thousands of servants to clean out all the palaces, pavilions, storehouses, and secret chambers on Mount Moon Gazing. With over 3,000 of Reverend Yao Yu's clansmen here, Huang Liang only needed to intimidate them a little, and they immediately told him all the storehouses and secret chambers on the mountain. Bags of spirit stones, bags of immortal stones, a large number of spirit herbs, ores, all kinds of beautiful jades, spirit crystals, all kinds of natural treasures. A huge number of treasures were carried out from all over the moon-gazing mountain, gradually piling up into a small hill in front of the pavilion on the top of the mountain. Reverend Yao Yu was a high-tier heaven immortal who had attained the Tao for hundreds of periods. He had established his foundation on Mount Moon gazing for a few periods, and had been operating the Yao Yu immortal market for hundreds of thousands of years. Therefore, he was extremely wealthy, and that was why he was able to rent a gold immortal item from a gold immortal to inflict a heavy blow on the Green Dome shark. With his wealth accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years, even if he only mined one immortal stone a day from the energy veins, it would still be an extremely huge figure. Moreover, the resources he had obtained from various energy veins in High Province, and the wealth he had earned through trade was far more than that. Huang Liang counted all of Reverend Yao Yu's assets, and in the end, Huang Liang could not help but break out in a cold sweat. Reverend Yao Yu's total assets were astonishing. His total assets were roughly equivalent to the total income of a first-grade province like Zhong Province for 2 years. On the other hand, a first-grade province like Zhong Province had a total population of trillions. It was not something that a 9th-grade province like High Province, which had a population of less than 10 million, could compare with. With Huang Liang's resourcefulness, it took him 1 day and 1 night to count all of Reverend Yao Yu's assets. Carefully, he came before Wu Qi and whispered the huge figure to Wu Qi. Wu Qi was slightly taken aback. He did not expect Reverend Yao Yu to be so wealthy. The wealth and resources he had accumulated were more than enough to support the development of a sect with 1,000 members. After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi glanced at the oracles and armored soldiers standing around him, then waved his hand and said, "Brothers, thank you for your hard work in attacking Mount Moon gazing. I'll give each of you 1 immortal stone, 100 upper-grade energy stones, and 10,000 gold pearls as compensation." The oracles and armored soldiers were overjoyed, and Chi bowed to Wu Qi. 10,000 gold pearls were enough for these oracles and armored soldiers to live a luxurious life for 10 years, and 100 upper-grade energy stones were even more valuable. As for an immortal stone, even the oracles and armored soldiers of the human race could use the immortal energy contained in it. After all, it was the purest natural energy, and it was very beneficial to living beings with sufficient overall strength. On top of that, as long as the structure of the immortal stone was not damaged, even if the immortal energy contained in it was depleted, it could automatically absorb the natural energy and slowly recover itself. There would never be a day when it would run dry. An immortal stone was enough to be passed down as a family heirloom. Wu Qi's reward was extremely generous. As a result, the oracles and armored soldiers who besieged Mount Moon gazing were filled with joy, and they began to respect and get close to Wu Qi. At Wu Qi's order, 2 flying ships were fully loaded, and all the captives were taken aboard. Then, the overloaded ships slowly flew back to Ningbo City at a speed that was a few times slower than when they came. Along the way, Wu Qi found an opportunity to loot all the valuables of Yao Yu Pavilion from Manager Yu, who was waiting obediently in the wilderness. In short, Wu Qi had gained a great harvest from this trip. Not only did he have the valuables to develop his own territory in the future, he even had enough resources for the disciples of Underhand's sect to cultivate for dozens of years. Standing at the prow of the flying ship with a refreshed mind, Wu Qi was glancing around at the beautiful scenery when he suddenly received a message from the celestial fiend puppet. Princess Zhang had brought a large number of men and sneaked into High Province. Chapter 597. Half a month had passed since Wu Qi led the army to wipe out Mount Moon gazing. After eradicating the largest immortal power in High Province, De Yu's influence in High Province skyrocketed. Those immortals and itinerant cultivators quickly retracted their tentacles, and no one dared to act rashly or act as unscrupulously as before they found out the strength of the current prefecture overseer. For a time, High Province became peaceful, and everything was carried out in an orderly manner according to Yu Miao's will. High Province bordered the ocean, and its southeast was an extremely fertile land. It was a place with lush vegetation and abundant wild animals, with all kinds of fruits ripening twice, thrice, or even 4 times a year. There were countless mineral veins, and the weather was good all year round, and there was no suffering from wind or snow. It could really be described as a land of abundance. Near the mountains in the south, there was a piece of land about 1,000,000 miles in circumference that stretched diagonally into the ocean. The coastline of this peninsula was extremely complicated, with many deep waters and good harbors, and countless schools of fish in the surrounding waters. It was a natural top-grade fishing ground. At this moment, from the 5 counties under High Province's jurisdiction, 200,000 people were marching southeast with their families. They were hauling their pots, bowls, ladles, and other belongings in carts, calling their children along the way. There were a total of 1,000,000 people, and they were the people Yu Miao had transferred from the 5 counties to Wu Qi's private territory in return for a favor. Each of these people carried a bone talisman drawn by the oracles of the Directorate of Celestials. Natural energy kept pouring into the talismans, which then turned into magical power and flowed into these people's bodies. With the help of the talismans, these people could travel tens of thousands of miles a day as long as they hastened their journey. Days passed, and 3 months later, the 1,000,000 people finally arrived at the land in the southeast that Yu Miao had given to Wu Qi. Along the way, the elites of scouting office sent by Wu Qi gave them directions, and at the same time, they protected the people by driving away the ferocious beasts and poisonous insects they encountered along the way, as well as the ferocious and violent mountain spirits and water ghosts. Originally, Wu Qi could have used Yu Miao's serpentine flying ship to transport several thousand people at a time, and with a few energy stones, it would only take him half a month at most to transport the 1,000,000 people to his territory. However, Wu Qi had the intention to make these millions of people work hard. At the same time, he had also sent out the elites of the scouting office to guard and monitor them, and to select the talents that could be used in the future. During the 3 months of arduous journey, tens of thousands of outstanding people had caught the attention of the elites of the scouting office. These people had strong organizational skills. Along the way, although there were old and young people, men and women in the 5 migration teams, whether it was traveling, setting up camp, cooking, or other matters, everything was carried out in an orderly manner under their coordination and arrangement. Wu Qi would appoint these people as the first batch of officials in his territory to help him manage his people. There were also some who possessed extremely powerful individual strengths. They helped the elites of the scouting office and took on the heavy responsibility of protecting the civilians along the way. Among these mortals who had never practiced cultivation, there were heroes who could kill pythons with bare hands, and heroes who could slay dozens of tigers with a single sword strike. Without a doubt, these people would become the warriors and generals of the East Sea military court established by Wu Qi. They would be the private guards under Wu Qi's command, and they had nothing to do with the 10,000 soldiers the military court had just recruited. There were also some people who had learned some wonderful abilities on their own. For example, some could communicate with birds and beasts, some could communicate with ghosts and mountain gods, some could control all kinds of poisonous insects, and some could recognize the medicinal properties of various herbs with just a glance. These people who were born with extraordinary abilities would be the best candidates for the position of oracles in the Directorate of Celestials in East Sea County. With Princess Zhanglu, the mentor who had inherited the great Tao of Ancient God, the future development of the Directorate of Celestials in East Sea County would definitely satisfy Wu Qi. The 3-month-long journey had exhausted everyone, but it had also allowed the elites among the millions of civilians to unleash their dazzling brilliance. 3 months later, when these civilians had entered the territory of the East Sea County, Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu exercised their magic and transported them overnight to a peninsula that stretched thousands of miles into the sea in the southernmost direction. Along the northern coastline, Wu Qi had built an East Sea city, 20 towns, and dozens of villages within a circumference of 500 miles, with families as the basic unit and clans as the main structure. 1,000,000 civilians had gathered on this fertile land with their livestock and carriages of various sizes. To the north was a vast expanse of blue ocean, and the sea breeze was blowing gently, bringing with it a pungent smell of the sea. A large flock of seagulls could be seen wheeling in the sky, their silvery white bodies glinting dazzlingly under the sunlight, making them look like fairies from a dream, endlessly beautiful. The grass on the fertile land was as tall as a man's neck, and dense jungles could be seen everywhere. Not far away from these millions of civilians, a large group of wild beasts was gathered. The herbivorous beasts were leisurely looking in their direction, while the carnivorous beasts were greedily staring at these strange two-legged creatures that they had never seen before. The sea breeze with the smell of the sea blew, and the dense flowers in the grass sprayed out a large amount of pollen that flew with the wind. The sunlight shone on the dense pollen, like a group of fireflies flying out from the grass. The pungent smell of the sea disappeared and became a rich fragrance that wafted in all directions. The fragrance of the flowers was mixed with the refreshing scent of the grass, setting off the pollen that looked like fireflies. The constant cries of seagulls could be heard coming from the sky, making the millions of civilians standing on the grass feel as if they were really in a beautiful dream. They still had no idea why they were here. Their ancestors had come to High Province hundreds of years ago and worked hard to establish the foundation of 5 counties in High Province. However, when the new prefecture overseer gave the order, the 1 million people left their homeland, left their familiar houses, and came to this fertile land that no one had ever set foot on before, which had retained its original appearance. Everything had to start from the heart, and they had to open up a new home on this barren land. 1 million people raised their heads and stared blankly at Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu, who were hovering in midair. Led by Su Qin and Yen Bugui, the 500 elites of Scouting Office were patrolling in the distance, driving away the malicious carnivorous beasts. From time to time, they would look up at the densely packed civilians, their hearts filled with joy. Unlike Anlu County, these 1 million civilians belonged to them, and the land under their feet belonged to them as well. East Sea County would be their real root and home on Pangu Continent. These 1 million civilians would become their people, their brothers, and their fellow countrymen. Now that they were on Pangu Continent, right in the middle of the desolate grassland, Yen Bugui and the 500 elites of Scouting Office, and even the old man, Su Qin, had a strange feeling of homecoming. Holding Princess Zhongli's hand in his, Wu Qi just smiled and looked at the 1 million people without saying a word. Clad in a gorgeous and mysterious black palace dress, Princess Zhongli glanced at the civilians with a pair of eyes that were as deep as the dark night on her beautiful face. Everyone bowed their heads. They all thought that Princess Zhongli, who was noble, mysterious, and inviolable, was looking at them. It was as if her eyes were filled with a terrible power like a storm and thunder, and also had the gentleness and kindness of a mother. It was a strange feeling that made everyone feel uneasy. They felt that they were not looking at a beautiful woman, but a god. This place is called East Sea County. From today onwards, all of you are the people of East Sea County. Princess Zhongli's crisp voice rang out like the cry of a phoenix. Slowly, she raised her right hand and said, "My name is Zhonglu, and I will be your lord, sheltering you forever. In the name of Zhonglu." A beam of 5-colored divine light shot out from Princess Zhongli's fingertip. Suddenly, the ground began to shake, and deep rumbling noises were heard coming from underground. The 1 million people cried out in shock at the same time as they looked at a few miles ahead of them, where a city measuring 100 miles in both width and length suddenly rose from the ground. The city measured 100 miles in both width and length, with a wall that was 150 feet tall and 100 feet wide at the top. Such a magnificent city was shakily rising from the ground, and a fresh smell of soil came wafting into the air. This city was made entirely of soil. Princess Zhonglu smiled majestically and said, "In the name of Zhonglu, melt." Out of nowhere, 2 divine flames of purple and green burst out from the city. The city wall measured 100 miles in both width and length, 150 feet tall, and 150 feet wide, was instantly melted by the heat, while the soil melted into translucent magma that looked like crystal. The divine flames drilled down the city wall and went several miles deep into the ground. All the soil along the way was melted and turned into crimson magma. Heat towered into the sky. When the 1 million people witnessed this incredible scene, Some of them began to kneel down and worship Princess Zhonglu piously. Princess Zhonglu smiled delightedly and cried out in a deep voice, "In the name of Zhonglu, merge." A thunderclap rang out, and the city cooled down abruptly. Then, a magnificent city with a seamless body and a foundation that went several miles deep into the ground took shape with a boom. The golden-red city wall stood on the grassland, glinting dazzlingly under the sunlight. This city wall was completely forged by Princess Zhonglu with her magic power, and its strength was 100 times stronger than steel. It was more than enough to provide the strongest defense for these people. The land in the city was flat, and the streets and neighborhoods were well planned. Some important buildings, such as the City Lord Mansion, the Directorate of Celestials, the Military Court, and many others, had also taken shape. Just like the city wall, all the buildings were made of soil that had been melted. This was the East Sea City, the seat of the East Sea County planned by Wu Qi. Surrounding the East Sea City were 20 smaller cities, each measuring only 10 miles in both width and length. They were built by Princess Zhonglu with her divine power in front of all the people. They were followed by dozens of villages, each of which was also protected by a city wall. With the East Sea City as the center, 20 towns and dozens of villages covered the fertile land within 500 miles in circumference. Then, a great fire broke out and burned the grassland within 500 miles in circumference, sending plumes of smoke billowing into the sky. Amidst the cheers of the 1 million people, the fertile land was turned into fertile land. Wu Qi had taken his first step in East Sea County. Princess Zhonglu was appointed as the first county governor of East Sea County. Under her leadership, the 1 million people began to build houses, divide fields, build fishing boats and other tools, and began their lives in East Sea County. With the miracle of Princess Zhonglu, the 1 million people devoted themselves to the construction of their homes with an almost fanatical spirit. As for Wu Qi, after killing a few flood dragons who were stirring up trouble in the ocean, he rushed back to High Province at the fastest speed he could muster. Myriad Immortal Alliance had sent an emissary from the Ascending Immortal Hall, ordering the officials of High Province to hand over all the people from Reverend Yao Yu's clan. Chapter 598. The flying ship sped across the sky. Apart from the necessary crew, there were only 200 elites of scouting office on board. Clad in heavy armors, these soldiers, who had also practiced the true body of heaven and earth scripture, patrolled back and forth on the deck of the ship, keeping a vigilant eye on the surroundings at all times. After wiping out Mount Moon Gazing, Wu Qi and Yu Mu had made a fortune. Not to mention that Yu Mu had used the money to expand the prefecture overseer mansion and buy beautiful concubines and maids. Wu Qi had also used the money to buy 3 large and 9 small flying ships for the military court of High Province, which had greatly increased the overall combat strength of the military court. The flying ship, shaped like a great serpent, measured 1 mile and 336 feet long, and could accommodate 2,000 armored soldiers, was one of the 3 flying ships, and was now being used by Wu Qi as his mode of transportation. The 200 elites of scouting office were controlling the ship, while Wu Qi was sitting in the cabin, carefully refining Reverend Yao Yu's pearl, which measured about 10 feet in diameter. A stream of divine flame of order sprayed out of Wu Qi's palm, slowly burning the pearl, which was glinting with moonlight and emanating a gentle energy fluctuation. Reverend Yao Yu had taken the pearl from the body of a big mussel that had become a spirit in the deep sea, and it could be considered as a natural spirit item. The mussel had the ability to absorb the power of the stars and the moon, and the pearl could communicate with the power of the moon and the stars, transforming it into various divine abilities to attack the enemy. Therefore, Wu Qi had the idea of refining the pearl into his new weapon. Although the pearl was magical and psychic, in Wu Qi's opinion, it still had too many impurities. The reason why he used the divine flame of order to refine the pearl was that he only needed the purest energy essence in the pearl, and everything else could be discarded. Over the past 3 months, he had been busy migrating millions of people to build the East Sea County, so he did not have much time to refine the pearl. Over the past 3 months, he had spent 2 hours every day to refine the orb. Now, more than 90% of the impurities in the orb had been refined, and only a silver cyan orb core that was the size of a human head was left. It was releasing a dazzling radiance. The flying ship streaked across the sky, and Ningbo City was already visible in the distance. A scouting officer came to the door of Wu Qi's quiet room and gently knocked on the door. Wu Qi opened his eyes, retracted the divine flame in his hand, and swallowed the bead. Slowly, he nourished the bead with his own profound qi, strengthening the connection between him and the bead. Accompanied by a faint whistling noise, the flying ship landed on the square in front of the Directorate of Celestials in Ningbo City. Deep pits and ditches had been dug up all around the Directorate of Celestials in Ningbo City. A large number of people were busy cutting boulders and building new palaces. Wu Qi recruited 10,000 new soldiers in Ningbo City of Haijiu Province and purchased 12 airboats. As the original 3 palaces could no longer meet the demand of the military court, Wu Qi allocated a huge sum of money to expand the 3 palaces into 36 palaces and build a military camp nearby that could accommodate 10,000 people. The expansion of the military court and the expansion of Yumu's prefecture overseer mansion were 2 major projects that started at the same time. At the very least, the current area of Ningbo City was no longer large enough. Yumu was also planning to build a new city wall around the original one, enclosing an area of 40 miles in both width and length as the new city. The old city would only be used by the officials of Hai Province, and the new outer city would be where the common people lived. The annihilation of Mount Moon Gazing had brought Wu Qi and Yumu a huge amount of money and wealth, which immediately began to bring about tremendous changes to Ningbo City. With this as the foundation, not to mention Wu Qi, even Yumu could not agree to the conditions put forward by Myriad Immortal Alliance, to release Reverend Yao Yu and his clan members and disciples unconditionally. If that was the case, should they return all his wealth to him as well? They had already spent a lot of money. Could it be that Wu Qi and Yumu had to pay for Reverend Yao Yu out of their own pockets? 200 heavily armored soldiers of scouting office followed closely behind Wu Qi as he stepped off the flying ship. Huang Liang, who had long received the news, came up to Wu Qi with dozens of soldiers. He bowed to Wu Qi and said, "Your Excellency, I've heard that the emissary of Myriad Immortal Alliance is very rude and unreasonable. He made a scene in the Prefecture Overseer Mansion today, and even Your Excellency Prefecture Overseer has suffered a little." Wu Qi snorted coldly and patted Huang Liang on the shoulder. "You don't have to worry about these things. You're in charge of the expansion of the military court, and it will be a great merit if you do it well. The emissary of Myriad Immortal Alliance?" Huang Liang felt as if his bones had become lighter. Smiling, he bent down and said, "Rest assured, Your Excellency. With me here to supervise, who dares not to work hard? Don't worry, I'm sure the work will be done beautifully." Nodding satisfactorily, Wu Qi patted Huang Liang on the shoulder. After that, he glanced at the muddy construction site, then quickly led the 200 soldiers toward the Prefecture Overseer Mansion. The emissary of Myriad Immortal Alliance made a scene in the Prefecture Overseer Mansion, and Yumu actually suffered a little? Wu Qi's interest was piqued. What was the purpose of Myriad Immortal Alliance? What gave them the confidence to confront Yu's officials so forcefully? He walked briskly along the street toward the Prefecture Overseer Mansion. He did not see any pedestrians along the way, and the doors of the shops along the street were tightly shut. Wu Qi could sense a hint of tension and fear from those tightly shut doors. When he was close to the mansion, the street had been sealed off by the private guards brought by Yumu. 3,000 private guards and 1,000 oracles from the Directorate of Celestials had completely surrounded the mansion. The 3 large flying ships newly purchased by the Prefecture Overseer Mansion, together with the snake-shaped flying ship brought by Yumu, were hovering above the mansion. The decks under the ships were wide open, revealing the powerful weapons inside. The interior of the 4 ships flickered with bright lights, and hundreds of translucent, multi-edged crystal cones were aimed at a certain spot in the mansion, emanating a powerful energy fluctuation that made one's heart palpitate. When the guards of the mansion saw Wu Qi and his men, Many soldiers and generals bowed and saluted. Wu Qi walked over without saying a word. Before entering the mansion, he left 200 elite scouting office soldiers outside the gate. These soldiers had only been cultivating the true body of heaven and earth scripture for a short time, and the strongest among them only had an overall strength close to that of a heaven immortal. Therefore, he left them outside the gate for the sake of their safety. If they were to fight the emissary of Myriad Immortal Alliance, Wu Qi did not want his men to be wiped out. The atmosphere in the mansion was tense, and there were no maids or servants around. It was only when Wu Qi walked all the way to the entrance of the main hall that he saw Yumi and a few members of Yu clan blocking the entrance with 30 heavy-armored generals and a few moon oracles. When they saw Wu Qi approaching, Yumi and the members of Yu clan breathed a long sigh of relief as if they had found their backbone. Pointing at the main hall, Yumi whispered to Wu Qi, "Be careful, General Tan Lang. These people from the Ascending Immortal Hall of Myriad Immortal Alliance are very arrogant." Wu Qi nodded. In front of Yumi, he took out a bone talisman and crushed it. A faintly discernible ripple of restrictive energy immediately enveloped him as he strode into the hall. Yumi nodded approvingly. The bone talisman Wu Qi had crushed was a powerful talisman specially designed to defend against soul attacks. In Yumi's opinion, Wu Qi was so cautious that he had to protect himself before entering the door. Wu Qi acted so cautiously, which was what a qualified commander should be like. The atmosphere in the hall was tense, and the air was almost frozen. With his hands clasped behind his back, Yu Miao stood under the pillar of fire at the far end of the hall, surrounded by many officials of Ningbo City, all looking unkindly at the 3 black-clothed Taoists standing in the middle of the hall. Yu Miao's face lit up when he saw Wu Qi, and a relaxed smile appeared on his face. Before Wu Qi could say anything, one of the black-clothed Taoists snapped, "If you don't hand over fellow Taoist Yao Yu and his clan members in half an hour, don't blame us for being ruthless. You are just a 9th-grade province, and with your measly strength, Myriad Immortal Alliance can wipe you out easily." Yu Miao rolled his eyes and said with a cold and arrogant grin, "You have said that 3 times. If High Province insists on executing fellow Taoist Yao Yu according to the law of Diyu, what will Myriad Immortal Alliance do? Wipe out High Province? Aren't you afraid of getting yourself into trouble?" The black-clothed Taoist's tone became even colder. "Getting myself into trouble? Hell, with just your High Province?" Just as Yu Miao was about to say something, Wu Qi had already strode up behind the 3 Taoists. The divine sense of immortal cultivators was very sensitive, and as soon as Wu Qi entered the hall, the 3 Taoists had already discovered him. However, they deliberately ignored him, waiting for an opportunity to show off their strength. As soon as Wu Qi came up behind one of the Taoists, the latter snapped, "How dare you, you arrogant fellow! Get out of here!" With a backhand slap and a flick of his sleeve, a green thunderbolt shot out with a deafening rumble and smashed heavily on Wu Qi's chest. It was just an ordinary 5 elements palm thunder spell, and it was inclined to the element of green wood. When it exploded, not only could it hurt one's body, it could also paralyze all the meridians in one's body, making it impossible for one to move. The thunderbolts exploded, but Wu Qi did not move at all. He grabbed the Taoist's neck with one hand, lifted up the Taoist's body that weighed no more than 70 to 80 kilograms, and smashed him hard onto the ground. A crisp sound rang out, as if a dozen eggs had been smashed at the same time, and the black-clad Taoist's immortal body was smashed to pieces. A beam of golden light flew up, and the Taoist's immortal soul rushed out of the shattered body, staring at Wu Qi in horror. "Why you?" The Taoist whose immortal body was destroyed and the other 2 black-clothed Taoists were all stunned. They stared in horror at the bloody mess on the ground, trembling as they took a few steps back. The 3 black-clothed Taoists had the cultivation base of 12th-tier heaven immortals, and none of the officials of High Province present, including Yu Miao, was a match for them. However, in Wu Qi's hands, a 12th-tier heaven immortal was no different from a baby. Looking at the 3 immortals, Wu Qi said coolly, "The demon Taoist Yao Yu is in my hands, and so are all his clan members. The 9th day of the 1st lunar month in 3 months will be a day of great inauspiciousness. The whole world will be filled with murderous aura, and I'm going to offer him and his clan members to the heaven and earth ghosts and deities as sacrifices. Please come and witness the ceremony." The black-clothed Taoist looked down at the broken immortal body, then stared at Wu Qi through clenched teeth and said, "You've brought a great disaster to High Province." "Just give it a try," said Wu Qi in a deep voice. "If Myriad Immortal Alliance really has the guts, then slaughter the entire High Province. Let's see if I, the human Emperor Yu, will turn a blind eye to the grave crime of slaughtering an entire province, and let's see if I, the human Emperor, will allow you to do whatever you want." The three black-clothed Taoists saw Chi-Chi's expression flicker, while the immortal with the broken immortal body was the first to transform into a beam of light and fly into the sky. The other two black-clothed Taoists sped away as well. "Just you wait. Myriad Immortal Alliance will not let this matter rest." They snapped through their clenched teeth. Wu Qi and Yu Miao exchanged a glance, then laughed and said in unison, "We'll be waiting." Chapter 599. The servants were cleaning up the mess of flesh and blood on the floor. Wu Qi had smashed the Heaven Immortal's fleshly body into pieces, and his bones were crushed into powder, lying flat on the floor. The servants had to use sharp iron shovels to clean up the blood and flesh that stuck to the floor. Wu Qi and Yu Miao sat opposite each other in the great hall, with a small table placed between them. A beautiful girl in a red dress with an oval face carefully served the two of them and brewed tea for them. She was the personal maid Yu Miao had bought at a high price over the past 3 months after scouring the people of High Province. Holding the teacup, Wu Qi learned from Yu Miao about the background of the three black-clothed Taoists. It happened early in the morning. Just as Yu Miao was dealing with the affairs of High Province in the Great Hall, the three black-clothed Taoists descended from the sky in an insolent manner, striking down a large number of the prefecture overseer mansion's private guards with a series of thunder techniques. Later, 1,000 oracles from the Directorate of Celestials heard the news and came to help. Led by dozens of moon oracles, they laid out a formation and barely managed to fend off the attack of the three black-clothed Taoists. Even so, Yu Miao's shoulder was slashed by a sword beam from one of the black-clothed Taoists, and his arm was nearly chopped off. Fortunately, Yu Miao had obtained a few defensive treasures from Yu Miao before he left. As soon as he realized something was wrong, he immediately put on the bone armor, saving his life from the attacks of the three black-clothed Taoists. After that, the chief officials, adjutants, and officials of all the palaces in High Province attacked together. Together with the few powerful bone talismans in Yu Miao's hand, they were barely able to fight against the three black-clothed Taoists. After that, the three black-clothed Taoists explained their purpose. They were the emissaries of the ascending immortal hall of Myriad Immortal Alliance, and were ordered to inform the officials of High Province that if they did not want the people of High Province to be plunged into misery and suffering, they had to hand over Reverend Yao Yu and his family members, and pay a large sum of compensation. Otherwise, Myriad Immortal Alliance would definitely send experts to attack High Province to avenge Reverend Yao Yu and his family members. Yu Mu was very alert. Seeing that the three black-clothed Taoists had a profound cultivation base, and that the officials of High Province could not fight them, he quickly sent a message to Wu Qi, and only drove the three black-clothed Taoists away when Wu Qi arrived. After listening to the cause and effect of the matter, Wu Qi frowned. Picking up a cup of fragrant tea and draining it, Wu Qi looked at Yu Miao with a puzzled expression. Myriad Immortal Alliance was just a loose alliance of immortals, and Reverend Yao Yu was just an ordinary ally of it. So, why would the alliance come to High Province to avenge him? Every year, many of the allies of the Union of 10,000 Immortals were killed because of the attack by the Yu government, but they didn't see the Union of 10,000 Immortals coming forward with such great fanfare to demand an explanation. Yu Mu also looked at Wu Qi, puzzled. As a direct descendant of the Yu clan in Zhong Province, he knew far more about Myriad Immortal Alliance than Wu Qi. The relationship between Myriad Immortal Alliance and the Yu government was very bad, even extremely bad. The human emperor had personally issued an order to arrest the higher-ups of Myriad Immortal Alliance, and both sides were almost at odds with each other. But Panga continent was, after all, Dayu's territory, and even primordial immortals dared not to act recklessly here. Myriad Immortal Alliance had a tremendous latent power, and most of the immortals and itinerant cultivators on Pangu continent were inextricably linked to it. But no one had ever heard that Myriad Immortal Alliance dared to attack the Dayu government. Yu Mu told Wu Qi in a low voice what he knew about Myriad Immortal Alliance, as well as the doubts in his mind. According to his judgment, unless the higher-ups of Myriad Immortal Alliance were out of their minds, they should not have done such a thing. If Myriad Immortal Alliance really attacked High Province for the sake of Reverend Yao Yu, and if they really massacred the people of High Province, Dayu would definitely use all means to retaliate against them. The relationship between human beings and immortals on Panga continent was very delicate, and it was not easy for the Celestial Court and Dayu to maintain a balance on Pangu continent. Myriad Immortal Alliance's reckless behavior was likely to completely break the balance. Once a conflict broke out between Dayu and the Celestial Court, and a war broke out between human beings and immortals, neither side had the confidence to win. Once the number of casualties of the human race on Pangu continent exceeded a certain limit, the terrible consequences would be something that even the human emperor of Dayu and the celestial emperor of the Celestial Court would not be able to bear. As Wu Qi sat cross-legged beside the table, Yu Mu began to speak with fervor and assurance. In the past, the ancient saints created human beings in accordance with the heavenly Tao, using the bloodline of Pangu the great saint and many divine beasts to create the fleshly body of the human race. Saint Nuwa used the myriad spirit cauldron to transform her soul into the soul of the human race and awaken their intelligence. All the ancient saints swore together that the human race was the spirit of all living beings, the master of the heaven and earth, the race entrusted by the heavenly Tao. If Myriad Immortal Alliance starts a war and lets Dayu and the Celestial Court attack and kill each other, if the human race suffers too many losses, aren't they afraid that the ancient saints, who have long disappeared, will show up? Wu Qi's heart twitched a few times. The ancient saints created human beings together, and Saint Nuwa injected the soul into the human race and awakened their intelligence? The legend was similar to the myths and legends that Lu Xiaobai had read in some ancient books on Earth. But who were the saints who created the human race and what they were doing now? Yu Zong had no idea. But Wu Qi quickly put these distracting thoughts to the back of his mind. How could he have the time to speculate about these illusory things? Lightly tapping the table with his fingers, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "These ancient saints and the like are too far away from us. The first thing we need to do now is to find out why Myriad Immortal Alliance is standing up for Reverend Yao Yu. Later, I'll interrogate Reverend Yao Yu and find out if he has any powerful backers in the alliance. As for your Excellency Prefecture Overseer, get ready for a conflict with Myriad Immortal Alliance." Yu Mu's face suddenly became very serious. After pondering for a long time, he frowned and said, "Do you think a war will break out?" Wu Qi looked up at the sky and pondered for a full quarter of an hour with a frown on his face. Then he performed an incantation gesture with both hands and gradually merged the fluctuation of his soul with the surrounding void, imitating Princess Zhang Li's movements. At the same time, he silently recited an incantation under his breath, trying to find out the truth in the boundless fog with the art of divination. But, after a long time of effort, it was clear that Wu Qi did not have any outstanding talent in the divine ability to speculate the heaven's secret. So, he gave up and said with a wry smile, "Myriad Immortal Alliance is acting so arrogantly, and I've killed one of their 3 emissaries. It would be strange if they don't retaliate." After pondering for a long time, Wu Qi nodded and said, "They will definitely retaliate, but we can't be sure of the intensity of their retaliation. Will they really attack High Province for Reverend Yao Yu, or will they limit the storm to a very small area? We can only bear it passively, and we can't take the initiative to respond." With a long sigh, Wu Qi looked at Yu Mu, whose face was unsightly, and said, "Send a letter to Zhong Province and report everything here directly to Prefecture Overseer Bo Zhongfu, and ask Zhong Province to secretly send reinforcements." In the face of a formidable enemy like Myriad Immortal Alliance, It is not a shameful thing to ask for reinforcements. It is better to ask the Grand Oracle to send reinforcements to High Province. Yu-He nodded and said through clenched teeth, "We'll see what they want to do when the time comes." Reverend Yao Yu. He, Tan Lang, if you want to sacrifice him, you must sacrifice his entire clan. You can't hand them over to Myriad Immortal Alliance. We can't afford to lose our face. Wu Qi was very satisfied with Yu-He's attitude. Myriad Immortal Alliance was aggressive, and High Province could only use the toughest means to give them a head-on blow. Otherwise, if the Union of 10,000 Immortals got some benefits in High Province, they might send more people to High Province. Could it be that the Union of 10,000 Immortals would be like the former governor of High Province, letting the Immortals and rogue cultivators of the Union of 10,000 Immortals do whatever they wanted in High Province? High Province was Wu Qi's private territory, and he would not tolerate anyone encroaching on his interests in High Province. After the secret negotiation between Wu Qi and Yu-He, several official documents were sent to Zhongning City in Zhong Province at the fastest speed. Wu Qi and Yu-He mobilized their subordinates, including the officials of High Province, and personally joined the expansion project of High Province's city wall. The hierarchy of Diyu was very strict, and nobles like Wu Qi and Yu-He could not participate in all kinds of manual labor. Even though these nobles had the power to move mountains, and many things could be done with just a wave of their hands, there were many things they would not do because of their status. Just like the construction of the city wall of High Province, it took tens of thousands of people several years to build the city wall, but any official of High Province could build the city wall in just one day with his or her magical powers. But there was a difference between the nobility and the lowly. How could you expect the officials to do this kind of work? Now that Myriad Immortal Alliance was under pressure, Yu-He and the others personally built the new city wall, which was 300 feet tall and 50 miles wide. The oracles of the Directorate of Celestials brought out a large number of rare materials from the storehouse and carved all kinds of formations and talismans on the wall, which was made entirely of black rocks, and constructed powerful defensive mechanisms on the wall, as well as all kinds of vicious traps and ambushes. Yu-He had just made a fortune, and for the safety of High Province, he was very willing to spend a lot of money. Through the channels of Yu Clan, he bought a large number of powerful bone talismans, countless bows and arrows, countless armors, staffs, and countless powerful weapons. The 3,000 private guards around him were armed to the teeth, and the 10,000 soldiers Wu Qi had recruited had been expanded to 30,000 soldiers. All of them had received their own armors, bows, and other weapons. Even though the human soldiers did not have any cultivation base, as long as they could draw a bow and shoot an arrow, they could pose a great threat to cultivators. The various powerful rune arrows forged by the Directorate of Celestials and the military court could cause deadly damage to heaven immortals. Under Wu Qi's leadership, the expanded army of 30,000 soldiers was firing arrows at the target day and night. With the powerful weapons made by the human race and their large number, even if the Myriad Immortal Alliance's gold immortals came to attack, they would not be able to escape unscathed. After 7 days of intensive training, the secret reinforcements from Zhongning City finally arrived. When the new patriarch of Zhong Province, Bo Zhongfu, heard that Myriad Immortal Alliance had provoked the authority of High Province, he simply sent his third son, Bo Yunting, to lead an army of 100,000 soldiers. Among the 100,000 soldiers, there were 12 generals from the 1 to 3 stars realms of the second Panga Heaven, all of whom were gold immortals. And Bo Yunting himself was an expert of the 6 stars realm of the second Panga Heaven. The reinforcements sent by Yu Mu for his only grandson were led by Yu Huai. Apart from Yu Huai, there were only 9 of them, but they were all sun oracles secretly cultivated by the Yu clan in Liangzhu. The strongest oracle had 7 golden suns embroidered on his sleeve. With the reinforcements hiding outside Ningbo City, High Province had become a huge death trap. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.